Hold on. Ooh, just put this under here. Got my little. Sorry. Right. Hi. A call Congress to order. Happy Tuesday morning, Congress. We are going to start today with an industrial action case study, as we did yesterday. And I'd like to invite PCS members Mike Pullen, James Ward and Robert Smith to join me on the stage. Come up. Mick, James and Robert were involved in a 6-month industrial dispute with Hinduja Global Solutions at the DBS office in Liverpool. This group of 100 outsourced contact centre workers took 30 days of strike action last year over a derisory pay offer from their billionaire-owned employer. And they're here to tell us how they did it. And we've got Mick Pullen, branch secretary for PCS's HGS branch during this dispute. Please show your solidarity by giving Mick a warm welcome to conference.
Right. So firstly, I'd like to thank you for inviting us to Congress today. My name's Michael Pullen, and I was PCS branch secretary for HDS branch until January this year. HDS branch have kindly invited me to talk to you about our dispute with HDS last year and the 30 days of strike action that our members took against our employer between August and December. Our dispute, like so many other disputes within the last 12 months, was triggered by the worst cost of living crisis in decades and HDS's blatant refusal to enter into any meaningful negotiations with PCS and present a credible pay award that would help support our members for that 12-month period. As a branch, we tried every possible option to avoid having to serve notice of strike action. We actively arranged numerous meetings with HDS that were either deliberately ignored or stalled. Conciliation arranged by ACAS was always going to fail if HDS had no intention of negotiating. Our fight went from August through to December, and it felt like it was a war of attrition and that the dispute would never end. But our members stayed strong, and they were more determined than ever to continue fighting. During the dispute, we utilised the local press and media, and we also arranged a meeting with The Guardian to raise the profile of our dispute at a national level. Our branch attended numerous rallies to bring our cause to the public awareness, and a number of MPs, councillors and countless trade union branches stood alongside us on our picket line to show solidarity. Ultimately, it was the threat of a reballot and a further 6 months of strike action with indefinite strike action attached that forced HDS to reconsider their position and agree to a fair award that we could present to our members. If there's one piece of advice that I could offer anyone, it's always be open and honest with members and be prepared to manage expectations. It's easy for people to get distracted when they see and hear of other workforces being awarded 12 and 14% pay awards, and that's amazing, and credit to those branches for being able to agree that. But you have to make people understand that what they're getting is not always what you can deliver. People can lose sight of what you're trying to achieve, so you've got to keep speaking to your members to keep them informed and help them make those informed decisions. What's submitted in a pay claim and what you get back in return are often two completely different things. And as a branch, we always act with the best intentions of our members, and we'll continue to do so. As long as you're open and honest with your members, then they'll stay strong with you and they'll support us in the way that they did brilliantly last year. So thank you for your time.
Gemma.
Thank you, Mick. I now call Linda McCulloch to give the GPC report. Linda?
Good morning, Congress. The General Council has agreed a statement on reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete rack. Try saying that all together, it's quite a mouthful. And the President will advise when this statement will be taken. Congress, the GPC has agreed the following emergency motion. Emergency motion 2 on the collapse of Wilko, Save the High Street, will be moved by the GMB and seconded by USDA. Once again, the President will advise when it is hoped to take this emergency motion. I will report further to you on the progress of business and other GP decisions when necessary throughout Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. As Linda has reported, the GPC have agreed emergency motion 2 on the collapse of Wilko, Save the High Street. I intend to take this after published business. And Linda also reported the General Council has agreed a statement on RAC. That statement has been emailed to delegates, and there are some copies in the TUC information stand. I'm only able to take a few additional speakers this morning because we need to make up some time from lost business from the previous days. So apologies for anybody who misses out. We will notify delegates when we can take the motions that haven't been taken from the other sessions. Thank you. So without further ado, we start with section 4 of the General Council report from page 46. I call paragraph 4.7. And motion 62. On education, ensuring that all political parties put students and staff first for the 2024 general election. The General Council supports the motion to be moved by UCU and seconded by NAHT. Okay, UCU.
Thank you, President. Last year, I talked about the transformative power of education, how UCU members change lives every day in colleges, prisons and universities. This year, I want to focus on the power of education to transform our society, because it is education that provides the skills and knowledge that workers need to do the jobs that power our economy and support a just transition. It's education that allows people to participate in cultural life and in civic society. And it's education that allows people to hold those in power to account for their actions. That's why the failure of successive Tory governments to invest properly in education is not just an attack on students and education staff, it's an attack on working people. Our message to all political parties in the run-up to the general election is clear. You must invest in education. Since 2010, we have seen our further and education sectors decimated by underinvestment and marketisation, the scrapping of the Union Learning Fund, dramatic cuts to further and adult education, which have seen the loss of over 1 million adult learners. My father, Eric, was a proud adult education lecturer giving art and pottery classes that his students, some in their 90s, attended out of sheer joy. He would be appalled by the state of adult education funding today. Since 2010, the pay of further education staff has fallen by 35%, and the pay gap between FE staff and school teachers is now more than £9,000. A quarter of college staff leave the profession after 1 year, half leave after 3. That's why we're currently balloting in 89 colleges of further education over pay and conditions, 3 times as many as last year. In higher education, thank you. In higher education, the picture is similarly bleak. The raising of tuition fees in higher education in 2012 was a potent symbol of the marketisation and how it has ravaged our sectors. That tuition fee has placed an exorbitant milestone of debt around the necks of our young people. It has heightened competition between universities, deepening inequality across the sector as a whole, and increasing the precarity of staff. That's why UCU will be campaigning to bring back student number controls, not because we want to limit access, but to regulate it. Workloads in FE and HE are also higher than ever. That's not just bad news for staff, it's bad news for students, because staff working conditions are their learning conditions. That's why we put workload and casualisation at the centre of our bargaining agenda, because students deserve better than burnt-out, demoralised staff. But as well as change from the ground up, we need radical reform from the top down. And as we approach the next general election, parties must put the interests of students and education staff at the heart of their agendas. For Labour, that means going beyond lukewarm nods to the importance of post-16 education and matching the level of ambition shown by their predecessors. It was Harold Wilson's government that created the Open University, a truly transformative initiative that showed what can be achieved by a Labour government with a bold vision. Congress, this government is failing students and it's failing staff. The next government must scrap tuition fees and ensure that all types of education, whether in colleges, universities, trade unions, prisons or community settings, are properly supported. It must reverse damaging cuts to arts funding and ensure that everybody, regardless of background or geography, can access the education they need to meet their potential and to thrive. Congress, we need radical change and we need it now. Please support the motion. Now is our time.
NAHT.
Good morning, President Congress. I'm Paul Gosling. I'm the immediate past president of NHT, the School Leaders Union. I've been a teacher since 1992 and a school leader in the Southwest for the last 20 years. And I'm an occasional body double for Paul Whiteman. And before you ask, this wasn't caused by a crumbling school building. It is a head injury, but no one wants to see a nasty scab at this conference. So education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. That quote from Nelson Mandela is one of the most famous sayings on the value of education. So it's no wonder that the state's provision of education has not been a priority for the government for the last 13 years. They're too fearful of challenging and changing the status quo, which allows rich people to become more wealthy and keep working people in a perpetual state of struggle. The last 13 years of government have demonstrated a lack of ambition and investment in education, leading to multiple crises. A crisis in the shocking state of too many school and college buildings. A crisis in the provision of education for children identified with special educational needs and disabilities. A crisis in the recruitment and retention of education sector staff at all levels, caused by eroded pay and excessive workload. But at the moment, education is polling about 9% of the electorate in terms of priorities for politicians, compared to 52% for the cost of living crisis. I believe that's because, despite these crises caused by 13 years of government cuts, staff working in schools and colleges keep the show on the road because of their deep commitment to the children and young people with their daily contact with. People working in education are working incredibly hard to ameliorate the effects of over a decade of cuts and neglect. I believe that this has led the public believing that education is not a priority compared to other responsibilities of the state, where the crises are more visible. But those of us working in the sector know that, like some of our school buildings, the whole education system could be on the verge of collapse. And Labour must up its game in the finalisation of their education manifesto for the next general election. We need to see ambitious and well-funded plans to make education a priority for the children of working people, because education is the foundation of a prosperous and equitable society. Education shapes our workforce, our leaders and our citizens, and quality education ensures economic growth, innovation and social cohesion. So in conclusion, let's all unite today and demand that education takes centre stage at the 2024 general election. Please support motion 62. Thank you.
Congress, motion 62 is before you. Will all those in favour please show? Put your hands down. All those against? That is carried. Moving on, I call paragraph 4.5 of the General Council's report and motion 63, childcare, delivering a just and prosperous society. The General Council supports the motion, which is to be moved by Osdor and seconded by Unison. Paddy.
Morning, Congress. President, Congress, Paddy Lillis moving Osdor's motion on childcare, delivering a just and prosperous society. Congress, childcare is a trade union issue. It's an economics issue and it's an equalities issue. However, like so many other things in this country, after 13 years of Tory mismanagement, childcare in this country is broken. As a result of Conservative failures, we are now struggling under an overpriced system that is failing. It's failing parents who need good quality, affordable childcare. It's failing childcare workers who are often underpaid, overworked and underappreciated. And Congress, it's failing children who are missing out on opportunities and access to early education. A successful childcare system should support children to thrive. It should enable parents to work the jobs and the hours that they choose to, and childcare should break down barriers. Instead, the UK's current system is a barrier to work for those in lower paid jobs. It prevents parents from progressing, trapping families in poverty and ingraining inequality. In Oslo, we have 360,000 members who work in the private sector. Many are in lower paid sectors such as retail and warehousing, and the majority are women. Childcare, and in particular the cost of childcare, is a huge issue for our members. The cost of childcare, particularly for younger children, is simply unaffordable for many parents in lower paid jobs. And even where there are free hours available, the system is complicated and difficult to navigate. We know that many families don't know what they're entitled to, and many more are left with huge gaps in provision, forcing them to rely on informal childcare, often from grandparents and older siblings, or forcing parents to work opposite shifts, barely able to spend a minute together as a family. Congress, in a prosperous nation like ours, it's simply not right that so many people are held back by an overpriced, under-resourced childcare system, and it's simply not right that so many childcare workers are in contracts providing minimum wage and minimum terms and conditions. A terrible reflection of the values placed on a dedicated workforce which cares for and nurtures our young people. Our society needs a better childcare system, a system that works for parents, a system that allows women to achieve their potential at work, a system that supports our children and our grandchildren to thrive, and a system that values the dedicated workers within it. Congress, every family is different. Every family's childcare needs will be different, and there will not be one-size-fits-all answer to this problem. There's already a range of childcare options for families, and we must make sure they all deliver for working parents, whether it's nurseries, childminders, breakfast clubs, after-school clubs or holiday clubs. These providers are a vital part of our social and economic infrastructure, and they should be treated as such by the government. Congress, accessibility, affordability and availability, childcare. This would have a huge impact for low-income families. It would empower parents to work the jobs and the hours they choose. It would support children, and for many it would transform their lives, their life chances. I urge the TUC to campaign for a childcare system that works for the working people. Congress, I move the motion. Thank you.
Unison to second.
Good morning, President, Congress. Antoinette Solera from Unison, a first-time delegate at conference, and proud to be seconding this important motion, not just because almost 80% of Unison's members are women, but because more than 50,000 of our members work in early years. They know, and we all know, the difference that a high-quality, well-resourced childcare sector can bring to families and to children. Right now, families are really struggling to meet the spiralling costs of childcare, eating into already well-squeezed household budgets. And the failure to address this expensive and broken system means that many families face a constant struggle to keep a job that may not even cover the cost of childcare, and where they're having to organise an informal patchwork of care to try and make it all work. Even then, many workers are having to take second or even third jobs to pay for it all. So no wonder they're feeling forced to leave their careers altogether because they simply can't find a way through and it all becomes too complicated and stressful to manage. Congress, we know that early years providers are in crisis, facing rising costs, inadequate funding rates and severe challenges in recruiting and retaining skilled staff. As an example, registered childminders are leaving the profession at an alarming rate. So we need to tackle this crisis head on. Our children have the right to high-quality care delivered by properly paid and valued professionals. And we know from countries that value and invest in high-quality year-round childcare that those countries see huge economic benefits as well. And sadly, our broken system of childcare provision only serves to entrench the persistent gender pay gap, which has to be of concern to us all. Congress, this motion sets out how we can repair this broken system and take steps to create childcare support that values children and families, that values childcare professionals, and that helps to remove the barriers that discriminate against a huge number of workers in this country. So please support this motion. Thank you.
Congress motion 63 is before you. Will all those in favour please show? Put your hands down. All those against? That is carried. Congress, I'll call motion 64, standards in public life. Good idea, that, standards in public life. The General Council support the motion, and it's to be moved by FDA and seconded by Prospect. FDA.
President, Congress, Margaret Haig from FDA moving motion 64 on standards in public life. I'd like to start with a bit of interaction, if you can bear it, on a Tuesday morning. Who here is a school governor or academy trustee? Raise your hand if you can. Okay, a few, good. Add your hand if you volunteer for the scouting movement, cadets, coach a sports team or another youth organisation. Great. Add your hand if you're a reservist, a volunteer steward or a first aider. Yeah, we've got some more. Add your hand if you're a trustee for a charity, help run a food bank, volunteering in the NHS or a social care setting. That's amazing. We've got so many people volunteering in public life, and that's without mentioning any other of the lots of other roles that you might be doing in your life, and even not mentioning our union activities. And I don't think it's far-fetched to say that we all take those responsibilities, where we have them, really seriously. We follow the rules which are set out for the role, whether that be safeguarding or charity law or codes of conduct. We try to live by the Nolan principles: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. I'm a governor of a wonderful junior school in Barking and a trustee of a small charity as well. I think about these principles at every meeting of the governors or the trustees. They help me think of questions and check my own biases. They help me forget my own personal worries and focus on the needs of the pupils, the school staff, the parents, or the charity beneficiaries. They remind me that my role is about public good, not private gain. The Nolan Principles form a good list, a great list. That list has stood for almost 30 years as a benchmark in public life. In our public service roles, we may not always meet them to the full degree, but we strive towards them. Is it too much to ask others in public life to do the same? We've seen some pretty astonishing behaviour from people who have control in the highest echelons of our country, who seem to have forgotten or even consciously set aside these principles. If their first response is to blame someone else, they've forgotten accountability. if they lie about what they knew and when, they have forgotten integrity and honesty. If they fall back on the excuse of pressurised workplaces lead to bullying behaviour, they've forgotten the need for leadership. Congress, this is why we need a standards reset for everyone in public life, whether for ministers in government, local councillors, or anyone in between. FDA has consistently called for better consideration of ethics and standards with previous and current Prime Ministers, but it has fallen on deaf ears because they know best. This is why it's so welcome to hear the commitment by the Labour Party to establish an Ethics and Integrity Commission with responsibility over the Ministerial Code and the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments. This motion calls on the General Counsel to engage with this work to ensure that the enforcement of standards is consistent across the public sector, not one rule for me and another for everyone else. Any regulatory bodies in this field should be independent to provide public confidence, and there should be no political interference in appointments. And if someone falls short of the relevant expectations, investigations should be independent from start to finish. Putting yourself forward for a role in the public eye is not easy. We all know this from our union work. You may be criticised, and sometimes unfairly. You may feel that others are working against you, but you must understand that high standards are critical if you were to maintain the trust of those who have helped you into that position, whether elected or appointed. Let's remind people that we still care about the Nolan principles. We will hold people to them and find ways to ensure that they persist into the future. Please support the motion.
Thank you. Prospect.
Good morning, Congress. Eamon Guilfoyle speaking on behalf of Prospect to second this motion. This is my first time speaking at Congress. Thank you. President, Congress, this is one of those dispiriting but necessary motions. It's dispiriting because it calls for something that we used to take for granted, which is the existence that there might be standards in public life. It is necessary because the erosion of those standards grows ever more rapid. This is a story you all know, but I'll tell it anyway. There was a Prime Minister all too recently, and that Prime Minister was found to have deliberately misled Parliament, to have knowingly misled the very committee charged with investigating whether he had deliberately misled Parliament, and to have breached common rules by partially leaking the findings of the committee charged with investigating whether he deliberately misled Parliament, a committee that he had knowingly misled. But that was not what forced him, and I emphasise forced, from office. It wasn't those findings, it was because he had appointed a whip, despite knowing that there was sexual misconduct allegations against them. A busy weekend. But the rot has spread beyond Downing Street. Culture is set from the top, and standards have been eroded throughout our public institutions. There is a steady drumbeat of by-elections resulting from misconduct scandals. There are endless attacks in the press on hard-working civil servants, 30,000 of whom are members of my union, by ministers seeking to blame officials for their own failings. And there are institutions that should be apolitical but are being politicised. Nowhere is this cultural contamination more apparent than at our national broadcaster, the BBC. Prospect is proud to be one of the largest unions at our world-leading public service broadcaster, but our members and the public were failed by the appointment of a chairman who failed to declare that he had been involved in discussions on securing an £800,000 loan for the then Prime Minister. In case you didn't know, that's the same Prime Minister I mentioned before. Public trust in government and institutions takes generations to build, but can be destroyed in a single news cycle. That is why the Labour Party's commitment to establish a new Ethics and Integrity Commission is so important, one that allows investigations into the ministerial code to be open without the approval of the Prime Minister. This is not a party political point. Every party can and should adopt this policy. It is work essential to restore the public's faith in our institutions, because an erosion of standards results in an erosion of service, and government without integrity is bad government. Congress, please support this motion.
Congress, I'll take the vote on motion 64. Will all those in favour please show? All, put your hands down. All those against? That's carried. I call motion 65, renewing our fire and rescue service. The General Council support the motion, to be moved by FBU, seconded by Unison. FBU.
President, Congress, Adam Taylor, Fire Brigades Union. We're here today to bring this motion to Congress to sound the alarm about the state of our fire and rescue service, to seek your support for the FBU's campaign to defend it. When disaster strikes, be it floods, fire, terrorist incidents, animal rescues or road traffic incidents, it's the firefighters who stand as the guardians of our safety. They're here to prevent, protect and intervene, often putting themselves at risk to protect others. Picture this. 10,000 firefighters ready to respond in moments across Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. And the Fire Brigades Union is proud to be the only union to defend the rights and safety of firefighters. But heed our warning, for communities and the very industry our members serve are under attack, on the edge of destruction. For decades we've endured unrelenting devastation. Deregulation and austerity have ravaged our fire and rescue service, tearing apart the very fabric that holds it together. Westminster governments, one after another, have stripped us of UK-wide standards, torn our industry apart, all in the name of private profit. Central funding has been gutted, resulting in the loss of 1 in 5 frontline firefighter jobs. Our response times have slowed from 6 minutes to over 9. And depending on your postcode, some firefighters now arrive with only 3 on a fire engine. Firefighters facing the public moral pressure to act without safe numbers of firefighters in attendance. It's a recipe for disaster, endangering the public and our members alike. Since 2010, Tory-led governments have worsened our plight. They've attempted privatisation, sold off training centres, control rooms and more. They've entrusted the unexperienced with our service's fate, introducing police and fire crime commissioners, removing democratic accountability from the governance of our service, just like we've just heard about. In 2013, the Fire Minister in England tried to sneak in legislation to contract out the whole of the Fire and Rescue Service through a shadowy committee at Westminster. Congress. Their deregulation paved the path to the Grenfell Tower fire in 2017. Building regulations were slashed and voluntary guidance replaced them. Safety measures were ignored and justice for Grenfell remains elusive. They part privatised local authority builder control and introduced a race to the bottom amongst surveyors. They privatised a building research establishment, government's own research and testing facility, so they missed our warnings about the dangerous cladding. They have slashed the number of fire inspectors, leaving us with only 1,000 for the whole of the UK. They gave manufacturers and contractors a free hand to ignore fire safety rules for windows, fire doors, fire lifts, stairs and a range of other fire safety measures. We've fought tooth and nail to defend our service and public safety. We've warned, investigated and shouted from the rooftops, yet we've been excluded from advisory bodies while those who helped create this mess are in charge. It is more than 6 years since the Grenfell Tower fire. We have had 6 years of the public inquiry. There is still no justice for Grenfell. We have to hold private firms and top ministers to account for their failures. Now, they want to cut our pay, attack our pensions and dismantle our collective bargaining structures. Congress, let me be clear. We are in a war. This is a class war. This is a war of workers versus greed. Well, they started the attacks, so we must finish them. Our fight is more important. They are fighting to line their pockets with eternal profits for their vanity rockets. We're fighting to survive. We are fighting to protect our very lives. We won't back down. Firefighters are in a battle for our public service. And we're launching a campaign for sustainable investment, UK-wide standards and a revamped fire safety regime. We demand a statutory advisory body with the FBU at the forefront to oversee every facet of the fire and rescue service. We ask for your support, your solidarity, for we believe in defending a service worth defending, a service that safeguards our lives and communities. Stand with us and together, and we'll ensure the UK Fire and Rescue Service is not just fit for purpose, but a beacon of safety in a world of uncertainty. Congress, I move.
I've been informed it's RMT to second. Yep. not Unison, RMT. Eddie.
Eddie Dempsey, RMT Union. Congress, we're asking you to support the motion. Sadly, in the RMT and in the other railway unions, we know our brothers and sisters in the FBU far more well than we would like, because when we don't see them on the picket line, we often see them at the scene of rail incidents and disasters and looking after people. They were with us side by side in 7/7, rescuing people from the terrorist attack on our transport system. And there's people in this room, in both of our unions and others, who were there, involved and affected by that. We've just seen the judgment passed on Network Rail after they pled guilty for their safety failings in the Stonehaven disaster in Carmont. Once again, sadly, that was our members and the FBU having to deal with that. Our members have come out, walked out on strike to support the FBU on our Victoria line when there was no fire service because they were on strike. We knew it wasn't safe to operate that part of the transport network without those people ready to come in and look after us. So we're very pleased to ask you to support this motion, but it's a sad thing that we have to be fair. This is another incident in what I regard as the managed decline of Britain. You can see our fire service being rowed back. Even where I live, one of the first fire stations in London is now closed, going to be turned into yuppie flats. You can see the problems everywhere, closures of ticket offices, you can't get doctor's appointments, you can't see a GP. It's all part of the same picture. All of our public services, all of the people we rely on are seeing their wages cut back, their terms and conditions attacked, the services they serve being depleted, at the same time as the rich keep getting richer and the profiteers keep getting their profits. There have been 12,000 firefighters cut since 2010. So this has got to stop. These people have got to be looked after. We've got to have more people into the fire service, and they've got to have their institution restored to where it needs to be to look after us. They're there for us. We've got to be for them. Please support.
Motion 65 is before you. Will all those in favour please show? Put your hands down. Will all those against? That is carried. I call paragraph 4.6 of the General Council report and Composite 19, a Royal Commission into Government Failures on the Probation Service and the Criminal Justice System. The General Council support the Composite motion. It's to be moved by POA, seconded by NAPO and supported by community.
President, Congress, Mark Fairhurst, National Chair of the POA, proud to be moving this motion, calling for a Royal Commission into the entire criminal justice system. And why are we asking for a Royal Commission? What will a Royal Commission find? Well, I'll tell you what they'll find in our prisons. They will find in our prisons that when a prison officer is recruited to the job, they do all their assessments online. There is no face-to-face interview. People in charge of our prisons don't even know who's going to be working for them on the landings because they don't get to meet them or grill them over an interview face-to-face. They will find once they get a starting date, they are sent away to a training college for 6 weeks. Recently reduced from 9 because the employer is that desperate to get boots on the landings that they've squashed it into 6 weeks. 6 weeks of training which is not fit for purpose and does not prepare anyone for life on the landings. Life in the most hostile and violent workplace of anywhere in the world. The Royal Commission will find that I join the service as an 18-year-old recruit tomorrow, and because my retirement age is now 68, I have to work for 50 years on the front line, dealing with violence, threats and abuse before I can draw a full pension or enjoy a full career. It's unrealistic. It's not workable. They will find that we're understaffed. People working in jails, locking up 1,600 prisoners, only have 69 prison officers on duty. Is it any wonder when things go wrong? they will find that our prisons are creaking at the seams. Under-resourced and underfunded, this government have removed over £900 million from our budgets and reduced the staffing levels by over 7,000. And don't believe the spin. They've recruited 4,000 prison officers. We've only kept 700. Out of every 4 we recruit, we keep just 1 because nobody wants to work in a violent workplace with no support for anyone. Prisoners living in squalor. Well, I'll tell you something, Conference, we have had enough. And Rishi Sunak, you best start listening to us. The Royal Commission will find out that prison officers don't have the right to strike, removed from us in 1994, and shamelessly betrayed by a former Labour government who refused to give us that right back. Well, I'll tell you something, Sir Keir. When you get in power, you better put it right. So, Rishi, you best start listening to us, the general public, the public sector workers, the key workers, the trade unions, because we are the people who can kick you out. And by damn it, we will kick you out. So I say this, Congress, out with the Tories, in with the Royal Commission. Please support. Solidarity to you all.
Napo to second.
Thank you, President. Good morning, Congress. Ben Coburn, second and competent 19 on behalf of NAPO, a trade union and professional association for probation and family court staff, and first-time delegate to Congress. It's testament to the dire state of the criminal justice system in England and Wales that Liz Truss is probably only the 3rd worst of 11 Tory Justice Secretary appointments we've suffered since 2010. In that time, we've seen a massive rise in poverty and deprivation alongside an explosion of corporate greed and blatant, unpunished corruption. Crime impacts to the greatest degree on the most marginalised and vulnerable in society, who have always been the most likely to be demonised by those in power. The dismantling of an already deeply flawed criminal justice system over the past 13 years has been a reprehensible act of political violence perpetrated by the Tories, earlier abetted by their Lib Dem accomplices in coalition, against our communities and especially the working class. This has been achieved by a brutal combination of austerity, cronyism, privatisation and managerialism alongside the scapegoating of groups and individual workers. Congress, you've heard from Mark of the POA of the state of the prisons, staff, losing experienced staff, 100,000 so far gone in years. The building's fallen into dangerous states of disrepair and a surge in violence, including acts of self-harm and suicide. The situation is so dire that last week, not for the first time, a court in a fellow European country refused to extradite someone to the UK because of concerns about conditions in our prisons. Probation has seen the destruction of gold standard local trusts in favour of part privatisation in 2014. 7 years later, the government badly botched the move of all probation providers back under public control, though within HM Prison and Probation Service, HMPPS, rather than rooted in our local communities, it had been the case for most of our history. Many of the same leaders behind these recent failures, and they are failures, are currently attempting to drive through the one HMPPS programme, which NAPO believe will evade our collective bargaining agreements, eliminate our members' terms and conditions, and eradicate probation's distinct independent identity achieved over 100 years. Probation workers, in common with others across the criminal justice system and beyond, are broken by excessive workload, burned out by our employers' behaviour and demands, as well as sick and tired of seeing our skills and knowledge diminished or ignored by the employer and our government. We are too often unfairly blamed after instances of tragic loss or harm when responsibility lies with disastrous political decisions made by successive administrations or the systemic failings and discrimination in our agency. Only a Royal Commission can begin the long and difficult process or regeneration of building a better justice system that is fair, decent and accessible to all, serving our communities, not the powerful. Congress, I second this composite. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Delegate. While community is coming up to support, I'll call PCS and Unison, who've also indicated to speak on this composite. If you could come down here.
Congress, Lorraine Jakeman, Community Uni Branch Sec, HMP Peterborough, first time speaker. Our criminal justice system is unfortunately on its backside and broken, Congress. The constant carousel of Tory justice ministers have meant we've had no vision for our sector, no one addressing the challenges we face and no one listening. We've all seen the news this week about the escape of Daniel Khalif from Wandsworth Prison and on Monday a terrible stabbing of another prisoner. Congress, anyone within the UK's justice system could have told you that something like this would happen. Because whilst the media may have turned their focus on our broken justice system for a few days, those of us who work in it have been facing these challenges every single day. Our prisons are overcrowded, underfunded and understaffed, and this is why Daniel Khalif exploited this with the knowledge and escaped. The Ministry of Justice own figures showed that in the last year there were over 7,000 assaults on prison staff in England and Wales. That is unacceptable, over 700 of which were serious assaults. In my prison, HMP Peterborough, 5 weeks ago, I saw the worst assault ever I have seen in the 19 years that I have worked there. I cried my eyes out hearing of such a sad act committed on such a helpful, kind-hearted and great supporter that helps staff and prisoners and helps them, assisting them to be better people and changing lives for the better. Because of the safety failures of our justice system, she was allowed to have a bucket of boiling water that was 92 degrees mixed with sugar, so the molten liquid would stick to her body, thrown across her chest, her legs and 4 skin grafts. The pain she has been in is unimaginable. She has been in hospital for nearly 2 weeks and is not expected back to work until January 2024. Her life has been changed forever by doing just her job. My friends and colleagues, yes, she's strong, but she shouldn't have to be. She better get the justice she deserves, or I will be calling on the clown at 10 Downing Street and be sending our community members there to knock on his door and ask him why. Anyone who assaults an emergency worker should get the long arm of the law, and it cannot be accepted as a norm in any job. Congress, we need change. We are proud to support this composite. I hope you will too.
Well done, delegates. Community.
President, Congress, Neil Richardson from Unison. I don't know how many times we've heard this week, but Congress, probation service in England and Wales are in crisis. Actions are urgently required to restore and maintain public safety, to restore a high-quality service, to restore a probation service that our communities deserve. The underlying factors behind this are, and we've heard it all before, underfunding and mismanagement. Our service hasn't recovered from the catastrophic, ideologically driven railing privatisation folly. Our hard work, though, our members' persistence, our insistence did, however, prevail. And the government did see sense and brought probation back as a publicly run service. They have, however, created a highly centralised service run from Whitehall. For civil servants far from the communities that probation serves, and with negligible local transparency or accountability. Whitehall is doing its usual trick, its time-honoured response to difficult times, and they're having a major reorganisation. You've heard about it, one HMPPS, which I'm not going to go into. Ben did that. Just suffice it to say, we and our sister probation unions oppose. So Congress, underfunding and poor paying probation is damaging. It's damaging the service most of all. We all know this story, we've heard it many times, 13 years of pay freezes, occasional below inflation pay award, if you're lucky. And this has led to a massive erosion in the value of real terms pay for probation staff.
Cost of living pay rises over the last 13 years for us have totalled 7.6%. Unfortunately, cost of the real world has risen by 81%. The size of a pay award needed just to put probation staff back to the levels of real term pay they enjoyed in 2010, it'd be a whopping great 68%. It's therefore no surprise that the overall vacancy rate amongst probation officers in March this year was a startling 29%. This is at a time when demands placed on probation service are at an all-time high. There's not nearly enough staff to cope. There are intolerable and unsafe workloads placed on probation staff, and this crisis in probation affects us all. His Majesty's Inspector of Probation has recently released an important report. It shows that high-quality probation services reduce reoffending. Well, who'd have thought that? A good probation service reduces level of crime in our community. Please support.
Delegate from PCS.
President, Congress, Sharon McLean, on behalf of PCS, speaking in full support of the motion 66 and composite motion 19. First time delegate at the TUC today. PCS represents members across the justice sector, including in courts and prisons. We fully endorse the picture set out in this motion. The reckless cost-cutting and significant reduction in resource to the sector that have impacted our ability to be able to effectively deliver services to the justice, a cornerstone tenet of the British society. Further to the significant reduction of legal aid, our legal advisors and court associates are now having their workloads increased and cannot provide advice to defendants who cannot afford or supply their own legal counsel. This compounds the cost of living issues faced by people who are struggling financially, leaving true justice as the preserve of those who can pay for it. The impact of over a decade of cuts to the sector are not only negative for staff that work within the justice, with frozen pay and widening unsustainable workloads, but they are impacting their ability to deliver quality justice for the British people. The decimation of the justice sector is a hollowing of our ability for our members to do their jobs and deliver the key services, ensuring that everyone who comes before our courts are treated fairly. The impact this is having on staff employed across the justice sector is self-evident. PCS represent a large number of members in HMCTS and HMPPS and are seeing first-hand the issues of recruitment and retention being faced. The attempt to mask the problems by the introduction of new technologies to digitalise key processes is further exacerbating the issues highlighted in the motion. PCS does not oppose the introduction of digital technologies or measures that would improve the technology that our members and court users use. Indeed, we would welcome a modern IT that is fit for purpose and supports access to justice and quality justice delivery rather than replace or diminish it. Fundamentally flawed IT, particularly in the magistrates and the courts, has caused increased pressure to our members. Cases take longer. Members have reported an overwhelming numbers that is having a negative impact on the quality of justice delivered. As TUC Congress, we must be equally concerned about the plight of our members in these sectors, as well as the impact that their treatment is having on fundamental functioning of the British justice system. Justice cannot be done while our systems are floundering. The primary principle of British society is at risk. That is why PCS fully support the motion and the resolution to campaign for a Royal Commission to conduct a root and branch review and to take a long-term and in-depth approach to resolving the huge issue in the UK. Congress, I encourage wholeheartedly to vote for this motion. Vote yes for those who work in the justice. Vote yes for the people, for the public who rely on that justice system, and vote yes for this crucial starting point of reform. Thank you.
Congress Composite 19, I'll take the vote. Will all those in favour please show? Put your hands down. All those against? That is carried. Congress, I call motion 68, remove CAFCAS from the civil service pay remit. The General Council support the motion to be moved by NAPO, seconded by POA, and Usdaw has indicated they wish to speak if they want to come down.
Morning, Congress. President Ian Lawrence, General Secretary at NAPO. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a safari park, but there you'll have seen all sorts of wondrous creatures revelling in their environment. But one thing you won't see is a pride of lions being led by donkeys, which is really akin to the position being faced by NAPO and Unison members working in CAFCAS. We've seen a successive group of ministers over the years fail that vital department and fail to support their staff. And as the motion says, we have a dedicated workforce who day in, day out help to protect and support the welfare of children and families in their time of crisis. But they do so under increasing strain due to insulting pay rises and higher workloads as a direct result of underinvestment by this wretched government. Just recently, you'll know about the 1,500 Performance Award paid to those under the civil service pay remit from a government that didn't even bother to consult the trade unions first, meaning that many staff, not only in CAFCAS but across the civil service, were put under immense financial strain if they were in receipt of universal credit or other benefits. Many of you probably will have had to deal with that. It's another example of government miscalculation and disrespect for its staff, many of whom, not in receipt of additional support, can barely make ends meet as it is. Many staff in CAFCAS doing a second job and undertaking independent social work on top of their full-time role. These are family court advisors, children's guardians, service managers and business support staff, the very people who keep CAFCAS and the family court system going. But more and more experienced practitioners are now leaving the service, lured to local authority social work teams, understandably, who offer much better rates of remuneration. And then there's the scandal of staff working for free. Yes, you couldn't really fathom it, could you? The survey undertaken by NAPO in 2021 showed 88% of staff having to work extra hours, essentially for nothing, because of the pressure they faced in terms of workloads. This amounted in some cases to a jaw-dropping 20 hours a week where overtime wasn't available. And because there's little opportunity to take time off in lieu, it's become a matter of course. And the first thing we've got to start doing is to wipe the smugness off the face of senior CAFCAS managers who know this is going on and are getting this work done for nothing. So that's the picture. I don't need to rehearse everything that's written in the motion, but we know that the civil service pay remit is now an insurmountable barrier to bargaining. And when we go to the negotiating table, whenever that is, we are met by senior management continually wringing their hands and essentially saying there's nothing they can do because they're tied by the remit. But, you know, staff in CAFCAS expect better of their leaders. It's time the leadership in CAFCAS started roaring like lions on behalf of their staff, actually putting pressure on ministers to at least meet with us, as Lord Bellamy refuses. So the motion is essentially about stepping up our campaign in the hope that a Labour government in the future will look afresh at the position on pay in CAFCAS. Because we need to be able to bargain effectively for decent pay rises for CAFCAS staff. We need to be able to help CAFCAS retain its dedicated and skilled practitioners. And we need your help, Congress, to help this vital public service to recover from years of damage and disgraceful neglect. I urge your support and move motion 68. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And to be seconded by POA, Steve.
Thank you, President. Congress, to save a little bit of time, Ian's made all the relevant points in respect to this motion, so we formally second the motion to save a bit of time. Thank you.
Oh. Delegate from Usdorf.
President, Conference, here on behalf of Usdorf. I'm not an official, I'm actually working a factory, and I'm here because I've actually had CAFCAS involved in a court case that I took to court. So this is like my personal perspective, and this will be why. In 2021, I started a prohibited steps application at the local county court, and part of that temporary judgment by the judge was that we needed a Section 7 report, which CAFCAS was involved in. Throughout the whole thing, I got the information I needed, they guided me, they spoke to my son, they spoke to me and sort of led the way. Throughout it, the representative of CAFCAS was very kind and helpful, explained anything I wasn't sure of, and they're very, very professional. I can't ever thank them enough for what that team did for me to stop my son being moved away. So they deserve every penny they get and more. So please support.
Thank you, Delegate. Motion 68 is in front of you. Will all those in favour please show? Put your hands down. All those against? That is carried. Congress, as I indicated earlier, we're going to have a General Council statement on RAC, and we're going to take that now. I call on Christina McAnee to move the statement on behalf of the General Council. Oh, she's not here. Oh. Oh. Whoop. A slight blip here. Is she not here?
Can someone else, can Liz do it? Oh, there's Angela. Can Liz do it? No.
Oh, hold on. Bear with, bear with. Is she not here? Oh. Right, slight distraction. As you can see, we've been joined on the platform by Angela Rayner, who I'll give a proper introduction to later. But you're very welcome, Angela.
Can someone else do it? Can anyone else do it?
Can anyone else do it? Paul has stepped into the breach. The General Council statement is actually going to be moved by General Secretary Paul.
Congress, Paul Novak, General Secretary, moving the General Council statement on RAC. Congress, indulge me. We are travelling in a time machine today. We're going back to summer 2018 when a ceiling fell in at Singlewell Primary School in Kent. The staff room is covered in rubble. The toilets are damaged, as is IT equipment, just 24 hours before there had been no sign of structural stress. It's a weekend, so thankfully no one's in the building, but extent of the damage makes it clear that had this happened during the week, it could have resulted in a serious loss of life. We're in December 2018 now, a few months later. The Department for Education is sufficiently alarmed about RAC that they contacted every school building owner about the collapse in Kent. Fast forward again, 2019, and respected building safety body SCOS issued an alert for all government departments highlighting the significant risk of RAC. Keep up with me, delegates. We're travelling fast now. It's 2021, and the Cabinet Office has just issued a formal warning notice stressing that RAC is now life expired and liable to collapse. The Chancellor, at the time, is Rishi Sunak, and presented with a request from civil servants to invest in school buildings, he uses the spending review to halve the number of school rebuilds. A rebuilding programme of just 50 schools per year is announced. March 22, 2022, Rishi Sunak is still Chancellor, lasting well considering the record of this government. And the government is still busy slashing schools funding. In fact, schools capital spending is at its lowest level recorded since 2009. Lowest recorded level since 2009. And now let's get right back up to date in 2023. Knowing that this was a present and growing danger, our education unions have been banging the drum for school building safety. Requests for information on which schools have RAC were ignored. Freedom of information requests refused. Unions had to complain about the Department of Education to the Information Commissioner's Office. Last week, we saw our 5th Education Secretary in just a year claim she had new information just a week before term was due to start. The known risk of RAC collapsing are not new. This government has willfully put children and staff at risk every single day, disregarding the evidence, ignoring the warnings and pursuing their ideological crusade to cut spending. Cutting spending at the expense of the safety of our children and at the expense of school staff. We need that this government listens. This General Council statement calls on the government to commit to higher standards of transparency, because we may have the list of buildings that are closed now, but it was like pulling teeth to get the Secretary of State to make it public. We need a government that takes action on safety, that invests in our public services. So, Congress, please support this statement. Please bolster our movement's campaign for urgent action and urgent investment.
Thank you, Paul. I've had some indications of unions that wish to speak on this important topic. NEU, NASWT, NAHT and GMB. Do you want to come forward? I'll take NEU first. Come. Great. Yes.
President Congress, Daniel Kebede, National Education Union. The government's education policy merges austerity with a deep hostility towards those working in schools and an indifference to those studying in them. These qualities have shaped the incompetent policy making that has dominated the last 13 years. The pandemic and its aftermath displayed this combination in disastrous Technicolor, and the teacher recruitment and retention crisis provided further evidence of its effects. From this perspective, we should see the dramatic emergence of the RAC scandal as a third, but probably not final, act. What has been long known by the unions, building experts and civil servants has over the last week become a public scandal. Schools told to close because they have been discovered to pose a risk to life. More than 100 partially evacuated. These numbers will rise. It's not their schools that are crumbling. It's not the Eatons, the Harrows, the Winchesters, it is ours. Keegan says she's been taking a cautious approach, but cautious would have been to invest the £7 billion needed to maintain the school estate. The reality is this government has invested a third of that. If this government had been cautious, they wouldn't have cut building schools for the future. A programme slashed by Gove in the name of austerity that would have eliminated RAC from every school. Instead of caution, this government has delivered chaos. Schools told to close days before opening, heads put under pressure the night before school starts, told to complete surveys by the DfE on Twitter. The fact is the school estate has been allowed to decline in an act of calculated neglect, and it's not just RAC. According to the National Audit Office, 700,000 children every day are taught in schools in desperate need of repair. 90% of schools still containing asbestos, creating a level of risk well beyond what is acceptable to expose our children to. Our profession and our children deserve better. This government needs to come clean on the scale of the crisis, but more than that, we need a programme of rebuilding. A starting point for politicians should be to treat our children as they treat theirs. They wouldn't have their children taught online, taught in marquees, taught in porta cabins for unspecified periods of time, and neither should we. Congress, please support.
NESUWT. NESUWT. Oh,
President, Congress, Borodar, Mark Morris, NESUWT, the Teachers Union. Always have a lesson starter. I'm a teacher. What's the difference between RAB and RAC? One is dense, full of hot air, dangerous and past its expected useful life. The other is a type of concrete. Not the right minister, but it's quite difficult keeping up, as Paul has said, with education ministers in Whitehall. But it's beyond a joke, isn't it, that? Indeed, our current minister proved herself to be a joke in that off-the-camera comments that she made earlier this week. We have heard a lot about how funding cuts of the last 13 years have impact on people's lives. But what says more about the dangers, the real dangers of these cuts, than the imminent collapse of a school building? As somebody who works in the same valley as Aberfan, Merthyr, I don't have to tell you how personal this feels. Health and safety is personal to me too. My great-grandfather is still underground in Sengennydd, the UK's largest mining disaster. As somebody who's lost their job in an architect's office in the 90s because of the last Tory government's cuts in the building programme, I feel that personal too. Buildings, health and safety, children's safety. Other motions on this agenda and past events show that sometimes people have to die before the law is changed and people heed the warnings. Sengennydd, Aberfan, Hillsborough, Grenfell, where people put profits first, children die. The ideology of austerity is a danger to life. Austerity kills. And colleagues, let's be honest, is there a health and safety regulation in law that hasn't been hard fought for by trade unions, generally following years of health-damaging practices and/or deaths? Congress will be aware of the numbers of schools in England that have been forced to close to some degree due to the presence of RAC. The department seemingly caught out, even though the first known collapse was in a school in 2018. The potential dangers of RAC have been known for some time, and the NSUWT has been pressing the department for being more proactive in dealing with the issue for many, many months. Before the summer, colleagues met with the department to be told about the advice the department were issuing to schools before the summer holidays. The advice included going round with a screwdriver and poking the concrete to see if it was crumbly. Poking concrete to see if it crumbles. No one never wants to waste an opportunity for profiteering. The ministers were wheeled out this last week or two to say that the government was in control of the situation. One offering temporary classrooms to be built quickly. Who's making the money for the temporary classrooms? Follow the money, people. Congress, they are taking us for mugs. Even though the union supports the decision that has been taken, it should. If the government had properly invested in the school estate or taken the required steps when the problems first become apparent, it wouldn't have come to this. Congress, we heard about the building programme, so I can skip that. Instead, we are in a building programme that at current rate will take 450 years to make our schools safe for children. And even then...
Can you wind up, Delegate, please?
One sentence, thank you. Congress, we have a government that understands the profit to be made in everything and the values for nothing. A government that doesn't care for children, doesn't care for anybody. Please support this statement.
NEHT. Cool.
Morning, Congress. Paul Whiteman, General Secretary, NAHT. And President,
thank you for allowing time to debate this matter this morning, although I know time is tight, so I will be brief. Congress, what a metaphor for the crumbling state of the country the RAC crisis is. The government ignoring warnings, making the wrong decisions, and when the political choice of austerity and inaction comes back to bite them, they panic and blame everybody else. Let's just look for a moment at what happened in schools. A decision by the then Chancellor to ignore the warnings and appeals of his own ministers to fund essential estate maintenance. Note that this is denied in the face of overwhelming indications that it's true. Warnings from the profession over a number of years put to one side. A joint letter from education unions in March of this year demanding progress. No satisfactory reply. Then over the summer, at an undisclosed point, new advice given to government that the steps taken to keep classrooms open were insufficient and classrooms needed to be evacuated. A new policy decision taken with just 3 days to go for the start of term. School leaders and their teams thrown into chaos again. None of it caused by school leaders and their teams, but all the responsibility for the solution thrown onto them. And then to be told by the Secretary of State through the Jeremy Vine show to get off their backsides and respond to her survey is simply an insult too far. Our members will tidy up after the government. They always do. But don't you dare insult us while they do. And the provision of temporary buildings must be that, temporary. What does teaching children in substandard conditions say to the nation about the ambition for them and the value we place on young people, the nation's future? And what does it say to the profession when they are already inadequately funded and will have to pick up the bill for much of the crisis? Congress, as the members I'm proud to represent might be heard to say now and then, Gillian, we're not angry, we're disappointed. You've let schools down, you've let children down, but most of all, you've let yourself down. We cannot let the government repeat the mistakes of the management of RAC that they have in schools. We can't let them repeat that across the public estate. Congress, send a message to government that we will demand better and we will not be treated with contempt as we do. Congress, support the statement.
GMB.
Good morning, President, Congress. Marta Patricia Anachuri de Bruxelles is speaking in support of this statement. First-time delegate, first-time speaker. The RAC concrete scandal is outrage. It's a personal outrage. It's an outrage for the whole nation. Across England, hundreds of GMB members found out at short notice that it was unsafe to open their place of work. Tens of thousands of school support workers do not know wherever a service has even been carried out. And in a personal note, my daughter, who is a teacher at a special needs school, she doesn't know either. Our members already knew that they faced unsafe building and violence in the classroom. Now they have to add it to this scandal. They acknowledge that they will be in an unsafe place to work. No one should feel unsafe at the place of work, and our members want to keep children safe at all costs. GMB has said for years that urgent investments is needed in uncrumbling a school building. This is something that we have repeated time and time again. Sorry, something else. The Conservative must be held accountable for the decision to cancel the building school for the future programs. We need proper risk assessments and consultation with all school workers, and trade unions should be consulted and keep updating to that. And the RAC concrete scandal affected by many more sectors too. Congress, we must make sure that unsafe materials in our school is not ignored. We need a response that brings together the trade union movement and take into consideration the health and safety of all workers. Keep our members safe should be our priority. Please support the statement. Thank you very much.
Opportunity for EIS? Yep, comrade.
Colleagues, this is a national scandal, a scandal that should never have happened, and a scandal that seems to have come from nowhere and crystallised into a big bang in a matter of weeks, despite the fact that other people have been warning governments and other bodies about this RAC for some time. And you have to say, colleagues, that this has been a terrible 3 years for pupils. Schools have suffered. We've all suffered from the ravages of COVID. Pupils' life chances in schools have already been heavily impacted by a rather clumsy and shoddy response to that crisis. We've got 40 schools in Scotland that are apparently affected by RAC 2. That's 40 schools too many. Dodgy school buildings can kill. That is a fact, and sadly there was a tragic accident in Scotland a few years ago when a wall collapsed on pupils, killing one. But the reality is that these crises of lack of poor school buildings, other lack of public investment, hospitals, and all those other areas which we fight for, they're not an accident. It's because over many, many years, public investment has not been at the levels that they need to be. We seem to be going in a place where a lack of public investment, doing things at the last moment, doing things as cheaply as we can, is having real effects, and that culture has to stop. Colleagues, we've got to fight for investment. It's not a boring topic, investment. It's something that affects every person's life, day in, day out. Colleagues, please support the motion. No, the statement. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades, for that really good debate. I now put the General Council statement to you. All those in favour? I'm getting that. I'm getting a unanimous vote for that. Yep. I'm getting a clear endorsement of the General Council statement to explain a slightly different process than the motion. Right. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker from the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, one of us. Angela is, of course, a good and long-standing friend of the trade union movement and is well known to Congress. In the recent reshuffle, Angela was appointed as Shadow Deputy Prime Minister. Woo, woo, woo. She's also, wait for it, Shadow Minister for Housing and Levelling Up and strategic lead for taking forward Labour's package of new trade union and employment rights through the New Deal for Working People. Phew. I think it's probably just simpler to describe her as Labour's finest. Angela, you're so welcome to Congress. Please.
Thank you, President. Hello, Congress, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's always a pleasure to address the TUC, and it's fantastic to be in Liverpool, the hometown of so many legends, the Beatles, the Albert Docks, and of course, Paul Novak. Now, I remember when I first met Paul as young trade unionists. Well, I was. But I do want to pay tribute to Paul. In his first year as the General Secretary, it's been an uneventful year, right? From facing down the Tories' vicious minimum service levels bill to their insulting refusal to get around the table with public sector workers, to the economic crisis caused in Downing Street but paid for out of your pockets. Throughout, you've been a powerful advocate for workers' rights. Thank you. Congress, I come here with one message today, that the next Labour government will build an economy that works for working people, with a new deal for working people. Labour will start by bringing forward an employment rights bill to legislate for this within the first 100 days of entering office. That's a cast iron commitment. Not only because this will be good for working people and good for our wider economy, but because our Fair Work agenda will be key to how we bring opportunity to every corner of this country. Last week, Keir appointed me Shadow Deputy Prime Minister, Strategic Lead for Labour's New Deal for Working People, and Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Almost as many jobs as I had before. But I am delighted to be in this new post. As a young single mum, it was a Labour government that levelled the playing field for me. When I most needed it, a council house gave me and my son a secure home instead of sofa surfing. And that in turn meant that I could go out and find a job that I built a life upon. And the minimum wage meant that I earned more. A local authority job gave me better skills at work, and a Sure Start Centre gave me better skills as a parent. And joining a union changed my whole life. And it was thanks to my union, Unison, that I was able to improve my life and the life of my fellow workers who I represented. I may have been born in Stockport, but I was raised in the trade union movement. That kind of levelling up transformed my life and my prospects because it was done right. A house and a job, a good unionised job with decent conditions, a thriving community, empowered to create good local services and educational opportunities. These things were my lifeline, and they're what real levelling up means to me. What levelling up could have been and what it could still be. Good jobs and secure homes are the foundations of thriving lives and of a strong economy. True growth, which benefits all people in all places of Britain, is built on the pillars of decent jobs and secure housing. They were the pillars that I relied upon to get to where I am today. But Congress, those foundations I needed to improve my life and my community has instead been levelled down by the Tories, with house building and wages plummeting across the whole country. The government's agenda is a sham and a scam. The mask has slipped, and the public have seen the truth. Warm words and politically driven handouts won't touch the sides, and empty slogans won't pay decent wages. False promises won't build secure homes, and a soundbite won't empower local people and local communities to take control of their futures. And Congress, never has this been more important. 13 years of Tory failure has left our economy shattered. People are on the brink, with a cycle of insecure work, poor pay and grave conditions. Recent scandals like P&O Ferries show how bad bosses can undercut the market. This government hasn't just turned their backs on vulnerable workers, but on our entire economy. But be in no doubt, Tory ministers are the only workers that can get fired and rehired on better terms and conditions, failing upwards. And all the while everyone else is pushed down, including you. For far too long, unions have had barriers put in their way to do your work, damaging industrial relations and worsening disputes. The Tories pushed through the 2016 Trade Union Act, preventing fair bargaining and holding back living standards. And this year, they gave us a minimum service levels bill, a spiteful and bitter attack that threatens nurses with the sack. And we know that going on strike is always the last resort, but it's a fundamental freedom that must be respected. So let me tell you loud and clear, Congress, the next Labour government will ask Parliament to repeal these anti-trade union laws within the first 100 days. This will enable you to get on with your jobs of negotiating better for your members. And I make no apologies that we will work hand in hand with the trade unions, as we will work with business to deliver a real partnership based on mutual respect, cooperation and negotiation. Labour's New Deal for working people will transform ordinary working people's lives. Work will finally pay. Rights will be properly enforced, and crucially, it will strengthen the role of trade unions in our society. Because this is vital. Because the New Deal wasn't created in an ivory tower by politicians. It was developed in collaboration with you, the trade union movement, and it will be delivered with you. And key to this, we will update trade union laws to make them fit for the 21st century. Because for too long, these have failed to keep up with the pace of the hard reality on the ground. Take the laws protecting reps and officials, which don't account for the technological advancements of the past 10 years. How our fragmented workplaces actually operate today, leaving you unprotected and exposed to harassment or the sack. Not just hampering your ability to properly represent and negotiate for your members, but ruining lives and livelihoods. I started on the shop floor, and I know how hard it is out there. The Consulting Association scandal that blacklisted thousands of union workers must never be allowed to happen again. Which is why I'm pleased to announce today that the next Labour government will act decisively and conclusively to stamp out blacklisting once and for all. First, we'll update regulations to outlaw the use of predictive technologies for blacklisting and safeguard against singling out workers for mistreatment or the sack without any evidence of human interaction. Second, we will act to end the loophole that allows employers to pass the dirty work down to third-party contractors so that any third party found to be carrying out blacklisting can legally be held to account. And third, we will give employment tribunals the power to order the destruction of any list, digital or not, to stop them being hidden or used again. And finally, Congress, we will ensure that lessons are learned from the past historic injustices so that these scandals can never happen again. We will support a full investigation into the violent events at Orgreave. And in government, we will launch a review into and release the official documents relating to the Camel Yard prosecutions. And that's not all. We will give trade unions a new legal, reasonable right to access workplaces, like your sister unions have in Australia, New Zealand, the Nordic states and more. And this will be underpinned by a regulated legal framework. There will be clear responsibilities and rules for all sides to follow, allowing you to meet, represent, recruit and organise members so that you can get on with the job to build stronger, happier and more productive workplaces without the threat or menace from rogue employers. As we've seen with Amazon, a small minority of employers are taking advantage of the lack of regulations to frustrate the process. It's neither fair to workers or productive to our wider economy. It only frustrates disputes, making it harder to come to a resolution. And good employers know the value of a trade union. We will also simplify the statutory recognition process to ensure that the gig economy and remote workers can meaningfully organise through trade unions, and will level up the rules to allow trade unions to use secure and private electronic balloting when engaging, communicating and polling their members. Including for workplace balance, but that's still not all, Congress. We will boost collective bargaining, both at a firm level and sectorally, starting with fair pay agreements in adult social care. We will empower workers and trade unions that represent them and employers in sectors to negotiate fair pay terms and conditions like training, in-staff benefits and more. And Congress, as a former social care worker, I cannot overstate the difference this will make, not only to these low-paid and far too often overlooked workers, but also to our entire healthcare system, weighted down by years of Tory neglect. We'll also protect existing sector-wide deals like the Fire and Rescue Services National Joint Council and support workers to meaningfully organise together to improve their terms and conditions. This is because we agree with the OECD that collective bargaining isn't just good for workers, but it can also be a benefit to helping companies and their staff adapt to technological and societal change. Congress, there's even more. Day one basic rights. A ban on zero-hour contracts, an end to fire and rehire, family-friendly working, strengthened sick pay, making it available to all workers, including the lowest earners, and from day one. We'll go faster and quicker to end the gender pay gap, address unequal pay, tackle sexual harassment at work, and put mental health on a par with physical health. And we'll bring in a proper living wage that people can actually live on. This isn't only good for workers, it's essential to growing the economy and raising living standards once more. The state will take a more active and strategic role in our economy by fixing UK's broken labour market, giving businesses the confidence they need to invest in our infrastructure and people once more. It's how we'll boost people's pay so that they have more money in their pockets to spend down their local high street, and how we'll turn the Tories' failure on productivity on its head. Because a healthier, happier and motivated workforce is good for the bottom line. And make no mistake, this agenda is good for workers, our economy and for business. Labour has a comprehensive plan to create good jobs across the entire country and raise living standards, all through our New Deal for working people. Alongside decent work, Labour has a plan to fix the housing crisis by building more homes. Homes that people can afford to live in, with a priority given to local people. And yes, that means building more council housing. The Tories are no longer the party of home ownership, that's Labour. A party that will be on your side and that will govern in the interests of the whole country. Good jobs and secure homes are the foundations of thriving lives and the foundation of a strong economy. True growth that benefits all people. So now, Congress, the battle for the general election is getting started. And it's not going to be easy. But this country cannot survive another 5 years of Tory rule. Ask yourself, what will be left? There's no doubt that Labour has to win. But to get this victory, we have to come together, stand together, and campaign side by side. And we need your help. Congress, I need your help to get the word out about the New Deal for working people. This is our platform, to make Britain work for working people again. That's what's at stake. That's what our shared future can be. So Congress, join me and let's fight for it together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And you can tell by the reaction of Congress you have support of the trade union movement. We look forward to you leading in government on Labour's New Deal, and we look forward to working with you to transform working people's lives. Thank you, Angela. Congress, we move on. 2 years ago, we established the Anti-Racism Task Force. We've still got a lot to do, but we are making important progress.
2020 was a wake-up call for the world. We saw the brutal deaths of George Floyd, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement around the world, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which shone a spotlight on the high number of deaths of BME people, a result of years of structural racism in health, housing, and work. In response, we launched the TUC Anti-Racism Task Force. This is a collective response to review the progress we, as a movement, have made towards racial equality and justice, and to pin down what needs to happen next. The task force has created a blueprint for our movement about what steps are required over the coming 5 years to secure transformational change for Black workers, members, and staff. We united the trade union movement with commitments to anti-racism. Last year, trade union movement leaders pledged to progress economic and social justice for Black workers and signed up to the Anti-Racism Manifesto. We've made progress in the 4 areas of work: collective bargaining, organising, campaigning, tackling racism in unions themselves, but we have a long way to go. This year, we continued our work on growing and diversifying our movement. We have launched a national database that has signed up over 1,000 Black reps across our movement. We have launched Black activist development programmes on leadership and organising. And with our unions, we have developed campaigns on issues such as outsourcing and health and safety for Black workers. It's with a collective movement to take this work forward and lead the change we need. To keep track of our progress, we've launched the Anti-Racism Tracker. This is a live resource, and it will update what's been done and highlight where unions are doing good work. The tracker is for everyone, our union leaders, officers, and members. Everyone should understand what progress their union should be making in each area of work. It's easy to use. Simply click on one of the 4 areas of work, and you will get a list of all the commitments related to each of the areas. Then follow on to see what work could be done in each area. So, check out the Anti-Racism Tracker at tuc.org.uk/tracker, and let's build a diverse and inclusive movement for us all.
President, when I spoke to this Congress last year as General Secretary Designate, I said our #1 priority had to be building a stronger, more diverse, more inclusive trade union movement. Anti-racism, the fight for racial justice, can't be an optional extra. It has to be hardwired into everything we do, not just our organising, campaigning and bargaining work, not just our economic and political priorities, but also the way we support our own Black staff and activists. That's why we set up our Anti-Racism Task Force 3 years ago under the leadership of Patrick Roach, Gloria Mills and our Race Relations Committee. We've made some important strides forward, but we need to keep up that momentum. The manifesto in your delegate sets out our ambitions for the future, creating new networks of black reps and activists, and that commitment to train 500 new black activists every year, bargaining collectively for change, starting with outsourced workers, building international solidarity to challenge the far right and take on bad employers. But Congress, the change we want won't come about by just launching reports or passing motions. It comes through organising, it comes through taking action, and it comes from the work our reps do day in, day out in workplaces. We know our own movement isn't perfect. Sometimes we've fallen short of our ideals. We've failed to turn our principles into practice. But our history is also proudly punctuated with examples of when we have risen to the moment, when we fought Mosley's fascists on Cable Street, when we were engaged in the long struggle against apartheid, and when we united against the National Front, the BNP, the EDL, Britain First, or whatever other label the fascists give themselves. Now is the time to write the next chapter in that collective story. Congress, let's turn that anti-racism manifesto into reality. Let's win equality. Let's tear down the barriers facing our black members, their families and communities, and let's build a movement that proudly represents working class people in all our wonderful diversity.
President, Congress, and thanks for that, Paul. Really important statement. I mean, Congress, you know, this document is an extremely important record of our commitment. You know, 3 years ago, when the country was locked down, the evidence emerged of black workers dying at work. Black workers dying disproportionately because they were left unprotected by this shameful government of lawbreakers. And we said as a movement at the time that we demanded better. We said at the time that we needed to demonstrate to black workers that we, this movement, is on their side. We said that we would commit to an anti-racism task force to take forward our work in concert with our black members, in concert with all of our members and indeed with communities, in concert with the General Council and, of course, our fantastic Black Workers' Conference. And it was a proud moment to see that manifesto and our action plan secure the unanimous support of this Congress. But we also said that our manifesto and action plan must be more than words on a page. And we called on every union to discuss that action plan, that manifesto, with your black members, with your executives, with your staff, and to take action to win racial justice in our unions and at the bargaining table with employers, to take action to secure more black reps across our movement, to take action to provide safe reporting systems so that black workers have the confidence to speak out against racism, that all of our members have the confidence to expose racism in their workplaces and in our unions. We called on you to take action to fight the injustices of workplace casualisation and outsourcing, and to hold the government's feet to the fire through the COVID public inquiry. And Congress, you have risen to the challenge, and I want to thank you for that. And our implementation and oversight group is working with you all to demonstrate and to report on our progress annually to this Congress. We've already published an evaluation of the good progress that we've made to date. And I want to thank affiliates, our Black Workers' Conference, our Race Relations Committee, chaired by the fabulous Gloria Mills, and you for your leadership throughout. We've agreed priority actions, and as you saw in the video clip, our new anti-racism tracker will help all unions in taking forward the commitments that we've prioritised for this year and next year and for the next 5 years. We need all affiliates to use the tracker because when we leave this Congress, our work must continue. And we must not stop until our movement at every level looks and sounds like the workers that we are here to represent. Congress, last year, you pledged to progressing social and economic justice for black workers and to fighting racism in our workplaces and in our unions. And now we're asking your unions to demonstrate that we will walk the walk on the must-do actions that we expect all unions to take. That's what the tracker is all about, colleagues. We've given you tools, resources, analysis, and now access to training, as well as Paul confirmed in his great address to us yesterday. But it's now down to you, colleagues, to take action and to showcase what our movement is made of and what we're capable of. We need your action now more than ever before, because Congress, the Tories are waging a war against working people. They're doing that by stoking fear, division, racism, misogyny, transphobia, you name it. They're trying to use the politics of hate, the language of illegal migration to garner support from many of our own members who've suffered most under the last 13 years of the Tories. And we will not stand by and let that happen. So, colleagues, we know that the road to racial justice is long. We know that black workers are more likely to be denied jobs or promotion, more likely to be excluded from access to training and development, more likely to be unfairly disciplined or dismissed from their employment. And under the last 13 years of the Tories, the number of black workers in insecure work has increased by more than double. We need those workers to join our unions, and we need to win a new deal for working people. Congress, fighting for racial justice is what our movement is all about, and we must continue that fight, because the only thing that stands in the way of this government and its attacks on black workers and on all working people is our movement. Recruiting, organising, building a more inclusive trade union movement, and demanding a government that will put racial justice for working people at the very top of its agenda, because when black workers rise, we all rise.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Patrick. Congress, as we mentioned earlier, we have been able to catch up with some time, so I will be able to take some of the lost business that we've had over the last couple of days later this morning. Advance warning for those involved, I intend to take motion 28, regulation on corporate profiteering, and composite 10, financial services supporting the disadvantaged, after motion 41 at the end of this morning's session. So if delegates could be ready for that. Congress, we return to section 3, building a more diverse movement, from page 28 in your guide. I call motion 37, equal conditions for female professional footballers. The General Council support the motion, to be moved by PFA, seconded by the Royal College of Podiatry and ASLEF come to the front who are to speak. PFA?
President, Congress, it's a privilege for me to be here with you today at my very first TUC Congress as the Chief Executive Officer of the PFA. So as we say, first-time delegate, first-time speaker. We heard yesterday from our General Secretary, Paul Novak, about how proud he was to be the grandson of immigrants. Well, as the son of a Congolese immigrant and of an Italian mother, you can imagine that I would not be standing here today if it wasn't because my path crossed people like Paul, who believe that the workplace should not be about entitlement and privilege, but rather about hard work, dedication, and equal opportunities. So Paul, you said yesterday it was very personal. Your words mean a lot to me, so thank you very much. For those of you who don't know the PFA, we are the oldest sports trade union in the world. We represent all current professional football players in the Premier League, in the Championship, in the League One and in League Two, as well as the Women's Super League. This means approximately 5,000 current members, but also approximately 50,000 people who no longer play actively football, but can still access the services from their union. In terms of the history of the PFA, we have been at the heart of every major development linked to players' rights over the history of the English game. For over a century, we've driven progress that has helped shaping the game as we know it today, and we continue playing a key role in putting the players, employees, at the center of every single decision on the men's side. And believe me when I say that, because I've played and worked in different countries, it is through the work of the PFA that the rights of the players are probably at a level which is the strongest and the highest probably in Europe and probably in the world. Now, obviously, we now have a new fight on our hands. Congress, we must secure equal conditions for professional football players on the women's side of the game. Over the last 12 months, we have seen the unbelievable performances of our female athletes. Those high-profile success stories have been responsible for driving a huge growth and participation and also in support. Those young women have been an inspiration on the pitch, but also they've been an example to follow as to how they've used that platform to drive change off the pitch. They are PFA members, and we are extremely proud of them. However, professionals in the women's game in England do not yet benefit from the same protection as their male counterpart, and this is something that we need to deal with immediately. This is simply unacceptable. In the men's game, those protections ensure that changes that will impact the contract and condition rights of the players cannot simply be imposed upon them. There's probably someone complaining about me delivering this speech. They ensure that players have a seat at the table and a voice on key decisions being taken which ultimately affect them. In England, the women's game are not afford the same protection as their male counterpart. They also do not benefit from the type of collective bargaining agreement that are in place for female professionals in countries such as the US or Australia. Agreement that mean that players and their union do not have to continually fight issue by issue to achieve change. A huge amount of progress has been made in the women's game, but still much more needs to be done. This is a time of significant change in women's game because right now conversations are happening about the structure and ownership of the league going forward. Our members need to be involved in those discussions, shaping the future of the game, both for those who play currently, but also for those who will follow later on. As you well know, there's no point having a seat at the table if decisions have already been made. The recommendation in the recent independent review for women's football carried out by the former Lioness Karen Carney provide an excellent framework for the future and recognize the vital role that unions have to play in supporting professional players. Now we want those recommendations to be taken forward and implemented as AAP. I want to finish by taking the time to recognize the action that is being taken by players around the world to highlight the wide range of issues that still affect women's game throughout the world. Players across the globe have come together across borders and boundaries to show solidarity and support for each other and to drive change. As trade unionists, this is something that we should be very proud of. Players in the women's game should not have to continue fighting. Now, if they do, I hope you'll join me to fight alongside them to achieve change. So I would ask you to all do the same and please support this motion. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the Congress. Thank you, Paul.
Royal College of Podiatry, to second.
President, Congress, I'm Sue Pike from the Royal College of Podiatry. It would not be Congress if we didn't speak about footwear. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really proud to second the motion 37 with a little amendment. So as we've just heard, we've witnessed an incredible journey for our Lionesses, victory in the Euros followed by this year, reaching the World Cup final. What an amazing achievement. Yay. And it's a real testament to the growing prominence of women's sports and their ability to challenge bias and traditional gender stereotypes. But as we celebrate this progress, it's also essential to shed light on the pressing issue of appropriate sports footwear in women's sports. Now, most of you probably don't think about that, but I do as a podiatrist. And women's shoes are very different, or they need to be very different, because women's foot shape, their heels, their arches, are different to men's. So wearing boots designed for men can result in injury, so blisters, stress fractures, a lot of discomfort. A recent study by a podiatry colleague of ours identified 82% of professional women players suffer from pain and discomfort while they're wearing their boots. So imagine the impact that has on their ability to play. Sorry, lost my thing. So not just gender, but race as well impacts on foot shape and the width of our feet. Yet football boots are really tightly designed, so there's not enough room for our foot shape within them. Women also run and move differently to our male colleagues, but football boots tend to be designed on men's movement and on men's traction. Also, finding sizes is difficult for women. Now, some companies have changed their boots slightly to allow them to be made in different sizes to fit a woman's foot, but they're still designed on men's feet. The success of the Lioness has provided a much-needed boost to sports participation, which is brilliant. However, the journey for these women is filled with compromises, including the kit and the boots that they wear. Injuries are more prevalent in our female athletes, and they have longer recovery times compared with men. And the divide between foot anatomy and the boots available contributes to this. FIFA recognises the growth potential in women's football, attracting significant investment and sponsorship deals from companies. The PFA notes the financial disparities within the women's game, and we must also ensure young women inspired by their football heroes have access to the right gear and the right boots. This motion is not just about sports. It's about equality, diversity, inclusion, and health and safety, as we've heard throughout Congress, crucial trade union issues. We call for further research and a campaign for leading manufacturers to supply suitable sports footwear for women. And we urge the TUC to collaborate with all stakeholders to prioritise the health and safety of our female footballers. We welcome the PFA's motion on equality for all sports people and believe this should be extended to concerns around our footwear. I ask you to support this motion. Thank you.
Good morning, Congress. President Trevor Robinson from ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, proudly rising to support this motion. Congress, 2022 saw us celebrating England's women's football team winning the European Championship. This is the first senior trophy won by this country since 1966. Only a year later, they came ever so close in lifting the FIFA Women's World Cup. On both occasions, we celebrated the success like the champions that they are. However, Congress will be saddened to know the huge disparities between the women and their male counterparts. Women footballers in the UK don't have the same collective bargaining agreements as their male counterparts, which makes it near enough impossible to negotiate agreements to improve their terms and conditions. Whilst the men's have regular live football to promote the sport, from Friday night football to Super Sundays, the women are allocated a slot where the viewing isn't normally high. Proper healthcare is also massive problems for the ladies' football. Majority of football boots are designed for male, which puts women at a higher risk of injuries. Once injured, many of these women leave the sport due to the lack of healthcare provided. They don't have the same level of sponsorships or wages as their male colleagues. Congress, this is not acceptable. Former England international Karen Carney, MBE, a former England international, has recently published a review on the future of domestic women football. The recommendations aim to deliver sustainable growth in women football, covering crucial areas such as the establishment of a standalone company, minimum salary floor and comprehensive healthcare, a dedicated broadcast slots for women football, and lastly, identification of strategic partners. Congress, let's support this motion and ensure that not just the women of today, but the ones that follow have the parity across the board with their male colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate. Right, motion 37 is before you. Will all those in favour please show? Hands down. All those against? That is carried. Great. I call paragraph 3.1, 3.2 and 4.15 of the General Council report. Now we go on Congress to motion 38, ending the hostile environment. The General Council support the motion, and this is the motion from the Black Workers' Conference to be moved by RMT on behalf of the conference and to be seconded by Unison. Yeah, I know. I'm just checking which everybody wants to do that. Yes. Okay, she wants to. I'm just going to take.
Greetings, conference. Mel Mullins from the RMT for moving the motion 38 on behalf of the TUC Black Workers and the Race Relations Committee. The Windrush scandal is actually misnamed and should be the Commonwealth scandal, as Caribbean people are not exclusively affected. It affects not only those who came as children and grandchildren, but with the wider effects on those who they had to leave behind. As long as you have racism and inequality, you have a hostile environment. During the 1920s, the hostile environment was implied rather than actual policy. Don't believe me? Then where did no blacks, no Irish, and no dogs come from, and who put those signs up? Winston Churchill ran his election campaign on the slogan, "Keep Britain White." Theresa May was 2 years into her job as Home Secretary when she told the Telegraph in 2012 her aim was to create here in Britain a really hostile environment for illegal migration. She claims in recent times that she regrets her actions, but sorry, some of us who have sadly passed away without realizing justice cannot hear you. People that came over from the colonies and had passports taken away by police and re-registered as aliens. I know you don't believe that. In May 1945, thousands of Caribbeans decided to stay after the war, as was their right. They had loads of difficulty settling in the UK. They came up from various hostile policies, one known as the coloured immigration of 1948 through to the 1950s. David Olusoga's The Unwanted, The Secret Windrush Files, and a whole list of other documentaries show what has happened since. We are not immigrants, we were settlers. We were members of the empire then. The European Union had free movement at this same time and were never treated or called immigrants. They were called European Voluntary Workers, EVWs. They worked, and more importantly, they came to stay. They were given preference over, even through pernicious policy, even though some of these people had fought against Britain in the war over black people who fought for the empire. They tried to hide it, but it's not hidden. Issues in returning to the UK when British High Commissions were instructed to obstruct British citizens from returning to the UK or bringing over their loved ones. When Commonwealth citizens were trying to return, they were mistreated as if they didn't have any rights. Enoch Powell travelled to the so-called colonies and directly recruited us to come here. Yes, he did. Windrush victims told that they have to pay upfront for cancer treatments, figures like £30,000, having their status and working rights taken away. The UK won't give Windrush victims their pensions, even though they can find government records of their history of attending schools and paying taxes. Children in care get criminal records, get caught up in the scandal, as they can then face deportation. There's solidarity between refugees, Windrush, and reparations. 100 million people displaced around the world, and poorer countries are doing their part. In fact, when you are showing proportionality, hardly anyone comes to the UK. And you wonder why? The Nationality and Borders Act, the Rwanda Agreement. This year, we are commemorating the many Caribbean contributions to the UK, recognising 75 years of Windrush. We are still fighting to get justice, adequate compensation for those affected by the hostile environment. There are minor and slow changes occurring in the scheme. However, the compensation scheme must now be run independently of the Home Office. Windrush compensation scheme is being used to silence the Commonwealth community, and right now the compensation scheme is prolonging the suffering of victims because so many are being wrongfully told they are ineligible. This is not right. The government does not like being embarrassed, and on a global stage, we need to look out for when it gets discussed at the UN committee, there must be a public inquiry. This is a Home Office scandal based on an unfair ideology and a superiority mindset, influenced by policies that created the effects that have unfairly treated so many. As you've heard clearly from the Fringe meeting yesterday, real-life impact is deep and harrowing. There are trade unions doing very good hard work on this. Our communities, industries, our movement have all benefited from migrant workers, so we need to be there to defend them. Our families, friends, members, we can do so much more, comrades. Please support this motion.
To be seconded by Unison, and I'm calling Unite and CW in this debate too. Unison.
Good morning, Congress. President, Keba Mane, Chair of Unison National Black Members Committee, seconding this vital motion from TUC Black Workers Conference on behalf of Unison. Congress, 75 years ago, the Empire Windrush arrived at Tilbury Dock. It may have been borne along by the waters of a terrible history of empire, of colonialism, of racist exploitation, but in the words of great Maya Angelou, the people it contained were determined to rise above the cold British winters, rise above the racism they encounter, rise above the fear-mongering politicians. They transformed our trade union movement. They brought their solidarity and their struggle. Above all, they faced the future with dignity and hope. Congress, we must put an end to this hostile environment. No individual, no child or adult should live in a fear of being wrongfully targeted by oppressive immigration policies. Congress, that is why we in Unison are working with others to take a legal challenge, a judicial review against Suella Bravermans for the outrageous decision not to implement in full the recommendations of the Lessons Learned Review. Congress, in January this year, Braverman decided to abandon 3 key recommendations, including strengthening the powers of the immigration watchdog, a new role for migrant commissioner, and a commitment to run reconciliation events with Windrush families. Congress, we demand an end to this hostile environment, call for a public inquiry into the Windrush scandal, a judge-led inquiry, and in order to prevent such tragedy from recurring in the future, we need to create a Windrush Act of Parliament. The Act will guarantee value, respect, and protect the Windrush generation and their descendants. To actually end the hostile environment, Congress, please support this motion, and I move.
Unite.
President, Conference. Susan Matthews, supporting motion 38 on behalf of Unite the Union, Ending Austerity. The mover have said a lot what I was going to say in terms of background, but let me just put a little bit more meat to what is happening. So here we are this year, marking the Windrush 75th anniversary, as we acknowledge that this government not only used us as a scapegoat, but also the immigrants from all over this country. We still need to be pushing the campaign for the Windrush compensation. We all witnessed this government hostile environment and immigration that led to the Windrush scandal. This government encouraged structural systematic racism with their political machinery, obviously, in terms of their policies and procedures, making a challenging environment for undocumented and immigrants, including the Windrush generation, who were denied access to service such as the medical, healthcare, housing, and employment. It's still ongoing. It is important that we ensure that all trade unions are focused on the key action so that people receive the compensation they do deserve. It's not a given, they deserve it. To hold this government to account and to push to ensure that the hostile environment ends and we prevent any injustice from happening again in the future. People deserve support and empathy. Their life were turned upside down, and there should not have been a fight or a struggle for compensation. They should receive it in full. There needs to be an independent review, as my colleague mentioned, for the Windrush scandal. Lessons learned need to be implemented. It means that our union support Black and ethnic minority workers in challenging institutional discrimination practice and policy within all organizations. Because this government continues to spout hateful rhetoric and diversion, A leading lawyer, Jacqueline Mackenzie, who served on the review and represent many Windrush victims, have now been subject to a swear campaign from the Conservative Party headquarters because of our opposition to their discrimination policies and practices they have in place. They have been clear at whipping up racism against migrants in going about with their campaign plan in terms of election. Conference, we need to show solidarity and support for Jacqueline Mackenzie, the lawyer who worked hard and tireless, free of cost for the Windrush generation. Right now, we encourage to push back on the Windrush victim in terms of not getting their compensation. The government is saying sorry, but sorry, and then on the other hand, they say, oh no, but no sorry, adding more injury and insult and injustice to the Windrush generation. Now I've finished the formal bit. I have 2 minutes left. In the struggle, in terms of the words of the favorite Jimmy Cliff, the harder they come, the harder they fall. Jimmy Cliff-inspired song does play in many parts of our Windrush generation. And in terms of that, it's only in terms of many rivers to cross, and it's only my will that we will keep us alive. I've been licked, I've been washed up for years, and I will merely survive because of our pride. The Windrush generation will still survive because of their pride. Conference, support this motion. Big up.
CW.
President Conference, good morning. Michelle Bailey from the CWU. Congress, this year was the 75th anniversary of the Windrush generation, and along with the CWU, I celebrated all the good that has come out of the contribution that has been made building this country and joining together. It saddens me that we are still talking about the Windrush scandal and the hostile environment that has been created and that is still affecting people today. Commonwealth citizens were invited to this country from the Caribbean and all these years later are caught up in the government's hostile environment legislation, a policy that was announced in 2012 which tasked the NHS landlords, banks, employers and many others enforcing immigration controls. Falsely deemed as illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, British citizens became to lose their access to housing, healthcare, bank accounts, driving licences. Many were placed in immigration detention centres, preventing from travelling abroad and threatened with foreseeable removal, while others were deported to countries they had not seen since they were children. Tens of thousands of people were ultimately impacted by the scandal. In yesterday's Fringe meeting, another sad story of yet another grandfather who cannot speak of the country's treatment. The Windrush Confiscation Scheme was established in 2019, but has been consistently criticised for delays, low offers and unfair rejections. Claimants are unable to access the requisite legal aid necessary to complete the burdensome application process and treated with contempt by their Home Office staff. As of January 2023, only 12.8% of the estimated nearly 12,000 eligible claimants have not been compensated. Congress, let's support this motion and change the Conservative Party's illegal immigration bill that has internationally been criticised for effectively outlawing asylum in the UK. Let's support.
Congress. Moving on to motion 38, the vote. This is the motion from the Black Workers Conference. Will all those in favour please show? Put your hands down. All those against? Well, that's unanimous. Thank you, Congress. Right, I move on to motion 39, research and guidance for trans young people. The General Council support the motion to be moved by AEP, seconded by AUE and FBU to come down as part of the debate.
Good afternoon, President, Congress. Kath Lowther, General Secretary of the Association of Educational Psychologists. My pronouns are she, her. First-time delegate, first-time speaker. Congress. As trade unions, we promote social justice and inclusion for everyone. The discrimination experienced by the trans community in the UK and the welfare of the trans community must be of deep concern to us all. We saw how Westminster quashed the Gender Recognition Bill. We watch aghast as the government's culture wars, aided by some sections of the media, stoke an increasingly hostile environment for trans people. Educational psychologists support young people and their families to feel safety and belonging in their settings and communities. We are therefore especially concerned about young trans people who face many barriers to feeling that sense of safety and belonging, and as a result experience higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Stonewall research shows that more than 4 in 5 trans young people have self-harmed, and nearly half have attempted to take their own lives. Trans young people report discrimination, feelings of rejection from peers and school staff, and experiences of bullying, harassment, and verbal and physical abuse. Trans young people constantly manage their visibility, knowing that it is stressful to hide who you are, but fearing that coming out will attract social disapproval and exclusion. Intersectionality, such as being both disabled and trans, or belonging to marginalized ethnic or religious groups, exacerbates these challenges. Yet, there is little evidence-based guidance available to schools around supporting these vulnerable individuals. For instance, schools have recently been instructed to tell parents if a young person is out in school. This could make that young person unsafe at home. They may therefore hide their identity, leaving vulnerable young people completely isolated and unsupported. Too often, as educational psychologists, we are asked to help trans young people too late. I think particularly of a young trans man who I got to work with only when he had stopped attending school. He had felt completely unsupported there and not seen or accepted as himself. Educational psychologists would rather be involved early so our trans young people do not experience the levels of distress and pain the statistics show. We know that experiences in childhood and adolescence can affect whole lives. Congress, we can do so much better as a society. We should prioritize early support and put in place the practices and cultures in schools that create a safe and positive environment. We can do this with better policies, staff training, peer support, an inclusive curriculum, and greater visibility and representation. Educational psychologists can support this development in schools and in other settings, such as children's homes, supporting young people directly, and supporting other professionals to improve their practice and feel more confident in what they do. Congress, the AEP calls for bias-free guidance based on robust research that shows what best supports trans young people to flourish. This should be directed at all settings and services working with this vulnerable community and their families. Congress further notes that similar action is also needed for the non-binary community. So, let's send out this message from Congress, from trade unions as a collective force for good. Trans and non-binary young people, we hear you, we see you, and we will uphold your right to be and belong. Thank you.
AUE to second.
Hello, conference. Lorraine Monk, Artists Union England, seconding the motion. Trans rights is, as our President stated in her speech to conference, a matter of human rights. Human rights are central to our duty as human beings to uphold and what trade unionists fundamentally stand for. It's not pick and mix. Human rights are the same rights for all. a right to be valued, respected, and live lives free from oppression. The Guardian yesterday carried a report on the consistent rate of suicide for every group. Little surprise when people's lives are becoming harder, poverty rising, and support services cut. But rates of suicide among children and young people have increased, as have other at-risk groups. Young trans people are suffering an increase in mental health issues, not surprising in this political climate. A situation exploited by right-wing MPs like Lee Anderson, who in February this year observed that to win the general election, the Tories needed headline issues. He observed, "It'll probably be a mix of culture wars and trans debate." Wars indeed. An organised backlash attacking almost 1% of our population, attempting to drive a wedge between different oppressed groups, divide, rule and exploit. Conference, when the human rights of trans people are attacked, homophobia is not far behind. The campaigns are well funded and depend on disseminating lies, stoking fear, prejudice and hatred. We support the initiative for robust, bias-free research to establish what best supports trans young people. Grounded research, not hysterical headlines written by Tory speechwriters. Dignity and respect for everyone. Conference, please support.
FBU.
Good afternoon, President, Congress, Maria Buck, Fire Brigade Union. The debate on trans rights continues to make people who are trans and non-binary a tool to divide us and spread hate. The debate continues to be highly toxic, focusing on presenting trans and non-binary people as a threat, as sexual predators, and in particular for trans women, as being a danger to women's safe spaces. The impact of this debate is real, with trans and non-binary people being subject to attack and violence, and that threat was brought home by the murder of Brianna, a 16-year-old trans girl in February of this year in Warrington. Brianna was a child who didn't identify in the gender of her birth. The position of Westminster government does nothing to recognise and support trans and non-binary people. The decision by Westminster to veto the extensively debated reform on the GRA over a number of days by the Scottish Government was unprecedented in the use of legislation that has never been used since the introduction of devolved administrations 26 years ago. That decision was not based on any House of Commons debate, but on party political position. It is frustrating that the Labour Party dither on this issue, and we as trade unions have been consistent in our support of trans and non-binary communities. I ask Conference to support this motion and remain resolute in our support for the right and for individuals to live the life in the gender that they identify. Thank you.
Stop distracting me. Okay, Congress, motion 39 is before you. All those in favour? Hands down. All those against? That is carried. Moving on. Moving on to motion 40, protecting trans and non-binary rights. The General Council supports the motion. This is the motion from the TUC LGBT conference and is to be moved by NHBCSA on behalf of the conference, to be seconded by GMB and NASUWT, PCS, UCU, EIS and Unison if you want to come down to the front.
Thank you. President, Congress. Julia Giorgio, NHBCSA and LGBT+ committee member, proposing the motion from this year's LGBT+ conference. I didn't ask for this like last year. Up until Sunday, I didn't know I was proposing this motion, but here I am. You know my background. I'm the only trans General Secretary in the union movement, banging on the same old drum. Trans rights, equality, blah, blah, blah. But hey, hello. Put down your device of choice for 5 minutes and think, isn't equality what we're here for? I stand in support and solidarity with any and all minorities. I stand with my sisters in the continued fight against misogyny and abuse, for equal rights and equal pay, with black workers in their fights against racism, with striking workers in their fights for better pay and conditions. As I said last year, it doesn't matter race, colour or creed, I stand with you. Shoulder to shoulder, though if you're 5'6" like my husband, perhaps shoulder to ear. Black, brown, women, men, religious or not, I will support you. But quid pro quo, we must work together. We welcome every and all allies, minority or not, union member or not. Everybody is welcome to fight alongside us, and they are, including Paul's strong letter to Badenoch and Faulkner following advice on possible changes to the Equality Act. And Paul, thank you for your support. As we heard in the last motion, which I was going to speak on, I support in full and thank you for your support. Young people are particularly affected. I remember as I came to realise who I was in the 1970s, how that felt. There wasn't much support. It was Section 28 and different times, but the same hurts and the same harms are happening now. And we know that politicians on both sides are campaigning to carry on or intensify those hurts. When we're hurt, you're hurt. When our rights are challenged, your rights are challenged, or at least next in line. Congress, the wonderful independent English legal system has recently ruled that despite guidelines of 18 weeks from first referral to consultation, over 4 years is fine for trans people, and that's increasing. Think about that. You go to your doctor to present with a problem, you need help, but you know as soon as you go into that surgery it's going to take over 4 years to get some treatment. Is it any wonder that people with dysphoria have mental health problems and need support? Pink News, while possibly not the most independent of outlets, reports that, and I quote, coverage of trans people has risen dramatically, with an average of 154 articles about the trans community now published every single month since 2015. That's over 13,000 articles focused on less than 1% of Britain's population. This might be a welcome change if the coverage was positive and inclusive. Analysis of the actual articles, as you could probably guess, shows it is not. Frankly, no shit, Sherlock. Imagine if that had been a focus on a different minority, and I don't want to push that across to anyone, but some mainstream religions are around 0.5 to 1.7% of the UK population, according to the latest census. So that could be 36 stories a day about a minority religious background. Or imagine the same level of coverage for the 17% of people in England who'd identified as disabled. 17 times 13,000, if you do your maths quickly, is 221,000, or over 600 a day if it were in proportion, but 90% negative. Is that right? Because it's not. Yet the great British public is majority in favour of trans rights, but that support is fading. Congress, we in the unions have consistently been a beacon of support to trans and non-binary young people and workers. Our film regarding Liam's name badge won awards. Our support for trans equality and trans rights has been unwavering. The message must be taken to the political community on all sides, an election fought on equal rights, not a culture war. Rights to healthcare, housing, equal pay, trans mask, trans femme or non-binary. Rights following on from that to equal pensions. A hurt to workers through their lifetime is reflected in their pension rights. Basic human rights. Black, women, disabled, religious or LGBTQIA+, we in the TUC fight for equality for all. Congress support this motion. I move.
President, Congress, Dean is made GMB's proud supporting of motion 14 on behalf of my union and the LGBT plus workers conference. My pronouns are he, him. Trans and non-binary workers are under attack. They need our support. We must reject the bogus culture war which is harming LGBT plus communities and our trans and non-binary siblings most of all. Freedom of speech is not freedom of consequences. This so-called culture war is being led by a government that has no answers and no moral compass. This was demonstrated by the unprecedented move to block the Gender Recognition Reform Act, which was passed by the Scottish Parliament with an overwhelming majority. Trans and non-binary people deserve dignity and respect. They are under attack from the government and large parts of the media, but they can never forget our solidarity from the trade union movement. Trans and non-binary people currently face huge barriers as they try to live their lives freely and fully. Whether this is to access gender reaffirming healthcare, where waiting lists can be many years long, or in the process of gaining a gender recognition certificate. There is still no legal process of recognition for non-binary people on passports and other government documents. This simple act of oversight erases our non-binary siblings. It is dehumanising colleagues. We need our Labour government, our Labour movement even, to stand up for working people's rights, and this includes LGBT plus rights. I am proud that my union, GMB, created a trans inclusion toolkit to help workplaces be more inclusive to trans and non-binary workers. And we need to use our TUC networks to roll this out into more unions. There are too many parts of society that are hostile to trans and non-binary people, but we can make sure that more workplaces make clear that trans and non-binary people are welcome here. Congress, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. I stand with my trans and non-binary siblings, as always. Support the motion Solidarity.
NASUWT.
Michelle Quadrington-Rogers, NASUWT, proudly supporting this motion. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a proud member of the LGBTI community, a proud LGBTI mum, and a proud LGBTI auntie. I am a loud-mouthed queer black woman, and I do want to thank AEP and AUE for the last motion. I also want to thank my sister Julia for introducing this motion so well. Passports for toilets for trans people. Trans History Month to be imposed on US state from next year. Do not require schools to tell parents their child is trans or non-binary. Give parents the right to see the context of sex education lessons in schools. Do not issue guidance making it unsafe for school students to question their gender identity. As Julia said, these are just a sample of some of the headlines that are out there that impact on the lives of our trans brothers, sisters, and non-binary siblings. Before the end of term last year, our wonderful LGBTI-friendly advocating government withdrew guidance that they had for schools in relation to how to support trans and non-binary students. As always, the education sector is still waiting for that guidance. But when there's no guidance, there creates a vacuum. And when there's a vacuum, there creates fear. There creates schools who no longer have confidence in standing up and supporting their children and young people, despite despite the Equality Act, the Human Rights Act, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, all clearly protecting the rights of our children. When schools and local authorities do introduce policies, they face court challenges and they face embarrassment in the press for trying to do the right thing to protect our children. NASUWT has created and supports our trans members network. It informs our policy and it helps us to understand what information our members need to know when they are in school, and they are often in the front line in front of our children and young people who just want space to be themselves. It is crucial that children are able to protect themselves, and they know that the schools are there to support them, because sometimes that threat comes from their own families. Apologies for a slight trigger moment. When Heartstopper came out, children like my daughter and her rainbow of friends celebrated the fact that their world was so beautifully represented on the screen. For those of us who are older members of the LGBT community, it created pain and hurt, because that was the way that education and school should have been for us. It's no longer good enough to say it gets better, but what we do need to say to our trans and non-binary children is, we're here to protect you, and we're here to protect you now. There is no LGB without the T. Please support this motion.
President Congress, Fran Heathcote on behalf of PCS. PCS supports the motion. We think it's a good motion which sets out positive action for supporting our trans and non-binary members. The government's blocking of the Scottish Parliament's Gender Recognition Reform Bill was outrageous. And it has to be said that Keir Starmer's instruction to Labour MPs to abstain on the Tory government's use of the Scotland Act allowed it to pass. Reform of gender recognition processes is essential to remove barriers for our trans and non-binary comrades. The current restrictions on acquiring legal recognition cause unnecessary harm and suffering to trans and non-binary people, emotionally, physically and financially, and removing all of these barriers must be a priority. The lengthy and invasive process of acquiring medical evidence to support a change in legal identity must be streamlined and simplified, and non-binary people must be given legal recognition. The Tories present their actions to voters as prioritising women's rights. The idea that Tories are defenders of women's interests would be laughable if it wasn't so shameful. 86% of the impact of the UK government's austerity policy since 2010 have fallen on women, from the scandal of poverty pay in female-dominated sectors such as nursing and social care to the drastic cuts in vital local services. British women at work endure the highest childcare costs in Europe, while our pensions are amongst the lowest. It's true that sex and gender have become contentious issues, but we must not let Tory politicians provoke more angry online discourse. We mustn't allow them to prevent constructive conversations about trans rights. At last year's Congress, I came up here and argued that to resolve tension amongst our members and activists, it's essential that there is discussion and debate. Women members of PCS are raising legitimate concerns over some issues. Others are raising concerns from an opposite, often polarised position. The discussion of ideas, allowing people to explore their concerns and find ways of uniting is a vital part of building wider support for trans rights. I'm pleased to report that this year in PCS we are building unity and discussion, making people feel safe to express themselves. The next stage in our work will be to discuss and consult on the Civil Service Gender Identity Policy and any changes to the Equality Act, so that we can build unity in our ranks on a campaign against the Tories' exploitation of these issues. They are the real enemy. PCS supports this motion. Thank you, Conrad.
UCU.
Hello Congress, Tilly Fitzmaurice, pronouns she, her, UCU. First time delegate, first time speaker. As a member of the UCU LGBT+ Members Standing Committee, I'm really pleased to speak on support of this motion on behalf of UCU. I've got a simple message to put across, so I'll keep this brief. According to UCU's own research, trans and non-binary staff are more likely than cisgender staff, whether men or women, to directly experience sexual violence. The number of reported hate crimes in the UK against trans people rose by 56% in the year to March 2022. These numbers are shocking, But friends, as trade unions, this isn't a problem that we can just sit back and let other people deal with. I'm really proud that UCU has played a leading role in affirming the movement's support for trans rights and for robustly defending any members who receive criticism on social media or in the press for doing so. But we must keep challenging attacks on our trans siblings. We all know that unions are the only organisations that workers have on our side. This means that it is unacceptable if even one trans or non-binary union member cannot rely on their union to have their back. We have to lead from the front. Please support the motion. Thank you.
EIS.
Congress President Selma Augustin, National Equality Officer at the Educational Institute of Scotland, first-time delegate, supporting motion 40. Congress, we believe that young people have a right to learn and teachers and lecturers have a right to work in an educational environment that is free from discrimination, where you can be your whole self and where the rights and dignity of all are equally upheld. Whether you're a boy, a girl, or a non-binary person, migrant or born here, whether you're white or a person of colour, and whether you're transgender or not, equality has no exceptions. But friends, what we're seeing today is toxic misinformation peddled by the far right and sensationalist media, attempting to scapegoat minoritized and marginalized people to distract us, a tactic as old as time. We will not fall for it, not now, nor ever. When the Gender Recognition Act was first introduced in 2004, objections were on religious grounds, but today the rhetoric reminds us of the shameful language used at the time of Section 28. This same rhetoric was familiar to international trade union colleagues that I met during Sydney World Pride conferences, including those in the US Don't Say Gay states. As highlighted by the UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, LGBT rights are under attack across the globe. But all eyes are on Scotland and the UK as a reminder that our hard-won fights can again be lost, and we cannot afford to lose. An injury to one is an injury to all. Congress, this GRR bill passed by a majority of 86 to 39 with no abstentions. This bill is one of the most consulted on pieces of legislation in the history of the Scottish Parliament, with the consultation process involving numerous rounds of evidence gathering and 9 months of scrutiny. This process found that there will be no changes nor any new exemptions to the Equality Act 2010 as a result of the gender recognition reforms proposed. What these quite minor reforms to the process would do, however, is to have a major impact on the rights and dignity of trans people. At the EIS's AGM in June of this year, delegates overwhelmingly reaffirmed our support for the passing of the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill. It's worth remembering, though, who we are talking about when we talk about gender recognition. We're talking about a very small minority in our society who are often completely invisible in debates about their own rights, their dignity, their well-being. We should be listening to what minoritized and marginalized groups in our society say that they need. And to any trans and non-binary siblings who are here today, we stand with you, we support you. Friends, they seek to divide us, to pit one marginalized group against another, one area of inequality against another, but our strength is solidarity, our power is collectivism, and there are no exceptions. Equality is not a pick and choose agenda. We know that only by standing together can we win equality for all. Please support.
Unison.
Morning, conference. Well, all right then. Good morning, conference. Well, all right. President, Congress, Bev Miller from Unison. Congress, Unison is proud to support this important motion. As trade unionists, we must stand up for all workers and look at ways we can build solidarity with the most marginalized in our society. I do not identify as trans, but I do believe that all people, including those who are trans, are to be treated equally and not subjected to discrimination or abuse. There is so much prejudice, discrimination, and hostility experienced by trans people that cannot be justified, and that is never acceptable. Raising awareness can help to promote a better and real understanding of what it means to be a trans person in a world that often ignores anyone perceived as other. Unison's Trans Equality Campaign, launched in July last year, has been a huge success. This campaign focused on how we can organise our trans, non-binary and gender diverse members. We also included how to promote and support trans allies in the workplace. We have developed a trans ally training package that is being delivered by Unison staff and members of our trans, non-binary and gender diverse network. This training gives practical tips on how you can be a good trans ally by providing an overview of current legislation and issues trans people face, an outline of the material we have available to support members, and looks at how to create an inclusive environment in your workplace. The demand for this training has been incredible. We have trained almost 2,000 members. We have now trained around 40 trans, non-binary and gender diverse members on how to be trainers just to keep up with the demand for this training. This training has been run in all of Unison's regions, and we include even more branches next year. This will be part of our plans to celebrate Unison's year of LGBT+ workers. We are very proud of what we have achieved. Our trans ally training has led to a sharp increase in trans activism. We now have over 400 members as part of the trans, non-binary and gender diverse network. They meet 6 times a year to progress Unison's work. We recognise the importance of ensuring that the voices of trans people are integral to the work that is done to promote trans equality. Educating and promoting trans allies is the best way to support trans and non-binary rights, and we look forward to continuing to work with the TUC on this. Congress, support the motion.
Congress, motion 40 from the TUC LGBT conference is before you. All those in favour? Hands down. Those against? That is carried. Thank you. I call paragraph 3.3 and motion 41, young workers say no to poverty pay. The General Council supports the motion to be moved by Unison on behalf of the Young Workers Conference and seconded by GMB.
Congress, President Ruben Brett from Unison moving motion 41. Young workers say no to poverty pay on behalf of the TUC Young Workers Forum. First time delegate, first time speaker. Congress, we're in a cost of living crisis, or rather a cost of profiteering crisis, which affects us all as workers. Everyone has seen rising energy costs, rising housing costs, rising food costs, and 13 years of disastrous mismanagement of the economy by the Tories has left us dealing with stagnant pay, underfunded public services, which are quite literally crumbling in many cases, as some other delegates have pointed out, and a government which lurches from crisis to crisis without a plan to improve anything for working people. And young workers, along with other workers, have been at the sharp end of this. There are now 1.2 million people on zero-hours contracts in the UK, and nearly half of those, that's 474,000, are aged 16 to 24. Young people are more likely to rent in the private sector, where rents have risen steadily since 2019 to record levels across the UK. And house prices have risen beyond the reach of almost all workers, even more so for young workers, meaning that young people can't afford to get out of the insecure private rental sector. Young workers are still discriminated against in the minimum wage regulations, which allow employers to pay a 20-year-old just 71% of the rate that their colleague who's over 23 gets, even if they're doing exactly the same job. It's no wonder then that 18 to 24-year-olds are one of the groups most starkly affected by the current crisis. And that impact is severe. For example, in mental health, last year Unison surveyed our young members about their mental health, and this revealed a shocking statistic. 80% of young members, told us that they had experienced mental health problems within the last year. Of course, many factors can affect mental health, but the economic crisis is a key one. The stress of low pay, precarious work, and insecure living arrangements takes a toll. One Unison member reported, "A lot of my stress and anxiety was related indirectly to work. The cost of living and being unable to afford it was the main stress." And another reported, "Living paycheck to paycheck takes its mental toll, on top of the inevitable burnout of being overworked." But young workers are fighting back. We've had enough of putting our lives on hold, unable to afford secure housing, unable to start families securely, unable to plan for the future. We've had enough of watching the government hand tax breaks to the rich, while school staff and NHS workers are forced to rely on food banks. We've been at the forefront of industrial action to secure better wages. Young Unison members were on the picket lines when ambulance workers took strike action in the NHS. Myself and many others have been on the picket lines with our colleagues in universities, calling for a fair pay settlement. But there is much more work to do. We know that young workers are underrepresented in our movement, and that means we need to focus on building our strength with the next generation of young workers. We need to make sure we are relevant to young workers and that we take young workers' problems seriously. That means young workers need to be visible in trade unions. That means trade unions need to be campaigning on things that are important to young workers. That means we need to be reaching out to young workers and actively encouraging them to become trade unionists, to become organisers and leaders in our movement. Only then can we secure a sustainable future for the trade union movement and make sure that young workers have the pay and conditions we need to survive and to thrive. Congress, I move.
GMB to second.
President, Congress, Charlie Gray, GMB Union, supporting motion 41 on behalf of TUC and Workers' Conference. Congress, our motion is informed by the reality of so many young workers. At our conference early this year, pay was at the top of our list of issues in the workplace. Office for National Statistics data confirms our industrial knowledge that the lowest earning employees in the UK tend to be younger workers. And the industries that are the lowest pay are the industries we know young workers are more likely to work in: hospitality, social care and retail. Congress, age banding in the minimum wage is one of the starkest examples of how inequality facing young workers with pay. Under 21s in our country are currently missing out on £2.5 billion due to age banding. That works out as an average of £2,800 lost in wages for every worker under 21 being paid less than the full minimum wage. It may be legal, Congress, but it certainly isn't moral. And I'll call it what it is, friends. It's theft, plain and simple. Money taken out of the pockets of young workers. That's money siphoned out of working communities across the country. This endemic low pay is ruining many lives. Under the last Labour government, 1 million children were brought out of poverty. But we have to ask ourselves, Congress, how many of them, due to stagnant wages, will this Tory government have plunged straight back into, as adults and teenagers, the poverty they were lifted out as kids? Congress, it is important that we recognise and applaud wherever young workers are organising and winning. This year, young members in GMB working in the Apple retail store in Glasgow won union recognition in their workplace, making history as the first ever unionised Apple store in the UK. GMB's Apple Glasgow members organised around pay and building workers' collective confidence in a sector that notoriously relies on keeping both of these low. They did so by utilising digital platforms for sharing resources and information. Their collective agreement was hard-won, but it's just the start of their work. This month, members voted to reject Apple's pay model and have instead won improved pay for the majority of staff. And the lessons: our young members at Apple Glasgow told our union's Congress young workers in the private sector are ready and willing to organise, but far too often lack the knowledge of how to organise. As young workers, we demand fair pay, good work and strong unions, strong, ambitious unions that organise on issues that affect young workers. President, I second the motion.
Motion 41 from the Young Workers' Conference is before you, Congress. All those in favour? Hands down. All those against? That is carried. We're running slightly ahead of schedule this morning, so I will now take motion 28 on corporate profiteering to be moved by Bakers Union and seconded by POA.
President, Congress, Sarah Woolley, General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, moving motion 28. Apologies for the delay. I didn't think we were going to get to this after the last motion. Congress, at a time when our members, food workers, key workers, were telling us how they were embarrassed, they no longer ask for friends to come over as they sit in blankets. Supermarkets were announcing record profits, putting more cash into the pockets of shareholders and wealthy directors and CEOs, while our members were and still are being forced further into poverty and telling us that they are cold and poor, quite isolated, and that their home has become a bit like a prison. Our members, as well as other low-paid groups in society, are disproportionately impacted by the relentless increase in grocery prices. They are being crippled by increases to energy prices on top of wages, terms and conditions, all being squeezed because their employers are saying there isn't enough money for more. We are calling for a statutory right to food for everyone in our country. The quotes I have given from our most recent survey, which was published earlier this year, Food Workers on the Breadline, that Nick, our delegate, spoke about during a motion earlier in this week, so for time I won't cover again. I'm sure you will agree that the experiences of our members is a stark contrast to the successes that supermarkets are celebrating, and it should be noted that we appreciate that this isn't being filtered down proportionately to the shop floor workers for them either. Through our work with the Food and Work Network that we created on the back of our initial report to look critically at the food industry, how we raise awareness about the importance of decent, nutritious, affordable food, how we organise around it, and how we cap this profiteering, we know that the situation spans far further than the food industry, because after 13 years of austerity and cuts, the majority of our class is struggling to survive. Excessive corporate profiteering by UK supermarkets, their power to put pressure on the supply chains, squeezing and eroding terms and conditions of workers, or just simply closing down sites, has got to stop. We need a statutory right to food for everyone, because nobody should be going hungry. Parents shouldn't be going to work without meals so their children can eat, and then having to go do a 12-hour shift on an empty belly. And nobody should be in a position where, and I quote, we have blankets on all our chairs to avoid using heating. We've gotten out of bed with hot water bottles in the morning. I earn more now than I have ever earned, and I still struggle to cover the bills. I've even stayed late at work to avoid having to heat the house for longer than I need. We're in 2023, and this is how workers are living, while shareholders are getting richer and richer. And just a quick plug, there's a week of action, the 18th to the 23rd of September. It's a Right to Food Week. Please look out for the information. I know there's been some flyers outside the Congress Hall, and I hope to see plenty of you there. There's lots of unions in the hall that are supporting Ian Byrne's Right to Food campaign. Please support the motion. Solidarity.
POA.
President, Congress, Joe Simpson, POA. Steve Gillen's asked me to come down and speak on this because he's still a bit nervous after yesterday. Congress, it's an absolute disgrace that the people who work in supermarkets can't even afford the food that they're selling. An absolute disgrace. It's also an absolute disgrace that bairns are going to school on empty bellies. It's also an absolute disgrace that parents are going without food so they can feed their bairns. This has got to stop. The obscene profits that we are seeing from some of the top UK supermarkets is just absolute pure greed. Congress, at our annual conference, we passed the motion for right to food to support our members in the workplace, but also in solidarity with our colleagues in the Bakers Union. And when you're talking about right to food, and this is where some of these clothheads who are in government don't understand, we're not asking for free food. What we're asking for is a good job with a living wage so we can afford to eat good, decent food. That's what we're asking for. And for all these people who turn around and say, well, I can cook a good, nutritious meal for 30 pence. Shut up. Congress, please support the motion.
Thank you, Delegate. Now, motion 28 is in front of you, Congress. All those in favour? Put your hands down. All those against? That is carried. Congress, I'd hoped to take a composite 10 this morning, but we're on the edge of time now, and we'd be running over if I took it. So we're going to have to fit that in later on with a couple of other motions that we still have to fit in. So bear with us on that one. We'll get back to you. This concludes this morning's business. Can I remind delegates there are various meetings, fringe meetings happening look in your Congress guide on page 33. Check the listings on the website. And again, to remind people, the hall will be closed between now and 1:45, so make sure you take anything you need with you, and you won't be able to get back in until 2 o'clock. But please be back promptly for this afternoon's session. Lots to do. Congress is now adjourned until 2:15. Thanks.
Thanks, Maria.
Okay.